Chapter 28:36. The world that the creator of a perfect world had created was now in a layer of chaos simulation that was completely different from any other layer of chaos simulation that he had ever known. This layer of chaos simulation directly indicated that the meaning of its existence was to facilitate the connection and communication between the many worlds. How could the creator of the perfect world have ever seen such a simulated chaotic state? He was shocked by the uniqueness of the so-called traffic network layer for a while. Then, he came back to his senses and began to be overwhelmed with shock. Previously, he was shocked by the concept of the traffic network layer. Now, he was overwhelmed with shock because he did not know why he had suddenly indirectly entered the traffic network layer. What do I have in common with this so-called traffic network layer? Why did it take the initiative to connect me? The creator of the perfect world was completely confused at this moment. He did not understand the root of all this. The number of worlds in the traffic network layer was tens of thousands of times less than the number of worlds that he could sense in the past. However, the number of worlds had to be calculated in the hundreds of millions. With so many worlds existing here, the addition of a new world was like a drop of water thrown into the ocean. It did not cause any ripples in the traffic network layer at all. Especially at this time, when there were new worlds joining the transportation network layer at every moment, it was even more so. At this moment, the creator of the perfect world felt as if he had entered a group that he had never come into contact with before. It was as if his entire world had been greatly expanded. "Fellow Taoist, have you just arrived?" At this moment, a voice suddenly came into his ears. The transmission of this voice shocked the creator of the perfect world. He had never encountered such a thing in the process of his cultivation for billions of trillion years. There was actually someone who could directly send a voice into his ears across the world, allowing him to hear such a voice so clearly with his own ears. In the past, he had always been the active party in contacting the other world creators. He had always relied on the connection between his perfect world and the other world. In other words, his perfect world radiated to other worlds to transmit his thoughts and voice. Then, through this radiation, he would receive the thoughts and voices of the other world creators. Now that he was in a passive state and could not even feel any movement, he had not experienced something like this for billions of years. However, he quickly reacted and understood that this was the characteristic of the traffic network layer that he was in at this moment. Fellow Taoist, perhaps you are not used to the traffic network layer. In fact, here we are like living beings in the same world. There will be no obstacles in communicating. The voice laughed at this moment. At this moment, through the characteristics of the traffic network layer, the creator of the perfect world had already discovered the source of the voice. It was in a world several nodes away. A node was a world, and several nodes away was a location several worlds away from this place. I see. This is indeed my first time here, so I don't understand the special characteristics of this place at all. I've made a fool of myself. The grand perfection world creator sighed. At this moment, he had already instinctively understood how to send his voice to the target location and into the ears of the world creator who was talking to him. The creator of the world had clearly seen the performance of many new world creators. At this moment, he was not too surprised by the performance of the perfect world creator. After roughly welcoming the creator of the perfect world, he began to talk about the purpose of contacting the creator of the perfect world this time. The purpose was none other than to rope in the perfect world creator of the perfect world for his own alliance. As soon as he stated his purpose, the creator of the perfect world couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded. Forming an alliance between worlds and being able to rope in new members one by one and work hard to strengthen his own alliance. If the world was replaced with cultivators, it would make sense. World? How was this possible? However, very soon, He slapped his head and scolded himself for forgetting that this was the traffic network layer and not the simulated chaotic state outside. It couldn't be more normal for this place to have its own characteristic. With just this small change, the creator of the perfect world became even more interested in the traffic network layer in front of him. This was a completely different characteristic from the other chaotic state. The scenery that the creator of the perfect world had never seen before was too attractive to him. Now that a world creator was trying to rope him in, it was clearly the best opportunity for him to understand the traffic network layer. Therefore, the creator of the perfect world didn't give the creator an answer at this moment. Instead, he began to use various verbal techniques to inquire about the situation of the traffic network layer. The creator of the heaven and earth had clearly expected this kind of behavior from him. After all, they were all world creators. Who would be stupid? Who would randomly choose a side without knowing what the situation was like? Therefore, it was normal for a world creator to inquire about the situation of the traffic network layer and gain a deeper understanding of it. Then, through all kinds of understanding, he would weigh what he should do to get the most out of it. In this way, the creator of the heaven and earth naturally didn't have any negative emotions towards the creator of the perfect world. This time, he had come to rope in the creator of the perfect world only to express his own will. He didn't want the creator of the perfect world to make a decision immediately. Naturally, he was happy to communicate with the creator of the perfect world. After some communication, the creator of the perfect world had a general understanding of the situation of the traffic network layer. He understood that the traffic network layer was currently in a state of imminent chaos. He also understood that this was a great opportunity for him. No wonder I could be pulled into this chaotic layer. It turns out that this place has completely broken free from the shackles. The creator of the heaven and earth might have a rather good understanding of the surface situation of the traffic network layer, but he couldn't compare to the creator of the perfect world who had only listened to his explanation about the essence of the change. As for why the transportation network layer was in such a state of chaos, the founders only thought that it was because the founders wanted to fight against the existence that controlled all the worlds with the shackles. However, as an experienced and knowledgeable creator of the perfect world, he was very clear that perhaps they had the thought of fighting against the existence, but more than that, they were probably fighting for the opportunity to break free from the shackles. There were no true secrets in the world. It was the same in the traffic network layer. Although Luo Fan and the heavenly Tao of the world of laws had not broken free from the control of the other shackles, it was no longer affected by any shackles. However, among the many creators of the heaven and earth in the traffic network layer, there were definitely creators who could see through this point. And the existence of such a creator of the heaven and earth would become an almost open secret. Under such circumstances, how could those creators of the heaven and earth not be tempted? Wouldn't they want to take this opportunity for themselves and completely break free from the control of the countless shackles? Being controlled was something that no one would like, let alone these creators of the heaven and earth. As creators of the heaven and earth, they were supreme existences in their own world and could be said to be omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipotent. Such existences would suddenly discover that their world was actually controlled by the shackles imposed by another existence. It went without saying how unbearable such a discovery was for the creators of the heaven and earth. It was precisely because of this that the many creators of the heaven and earth were almost in despair when they first discovered this. They felt that there was no joy in doing anything, and the traffic network layer became lifeless. Under such circumstances, they suddenly realized that breaking away from the control of the shackles and obtaining true freedom was actually possible. All they needed to do was to grasp a certain opportunity. It was easy to imagine what kind of performance they would have, and that opportunity was none other than the core of the transportation network layer, which was within the heavens and earth. It was precisely because of this that the creators of the heaven and earth would put a lot of effort on the world of laws and work hard to find ways to probe the world of laws and dig out the secrets of the world of laws. Of course, all of this was just what they thought in the bottom of their hearts. On the surface, they were just curious about the world of laws and displeased that the world of laws was secretly controlling their world with shackles, because the distance between the creators of the heaven and earth at the bottom and the world of laws was too far. It was difficult for them to see through the essence of the world of laws. To them, following a stronger world to fight against the world of laws was obviously a rather satisfying thing. In fact, they only treated this goal as a goal for themselves to strive for. Most of the creators of the heaven and earth didn't care much about the benefits they would obtain after achieving this goal. After all, although the traffic network layer strengthened the communication between each other, there would be conflicts wherever there were living beings. Many creators of the heaven and earth would always be separated due to their personalities and other reasons. Such separations would eventually lead to the emergence of conflict. Even if they didn't explore and probe the existence of the world of laws that was a target in front of all the creators of the heaven and earth, they would eventually find another target to fight against. In this way, they naturally wouldn't delve too deeply into the hidden secrets of the goal they were striving for. Compared to the creators of the heaven and earth at the bottom, although the creators of the perfect worlds were also at the bottom, they still used to control a perfect world. How could their knowledge be comparable to that of the creators of the heaven and earth, who were only at the bottom? Therefore, when he first heard the descriptions of the various situations of the perfect worlds, he immediately discovered the hidden benefits. Of course, in the process of making this judgment, the fact that his own world was now automatically connected to the traffic network layer was also an important reason. This was because his own world had automatically connected to the traffic network layer, and he had completely gotten rid of all the characteristics of the perfect world from before. Therefore, he only needed to make a slight deduction to know that the strongest world in the traffic network layer had definitely gotten rid of the pyramid structure of heaven and earth. In other words, that world had already severed the shackles the other worlds had placed on it. At the very least, those shackles couldn't affect him at all. At the very least, they couldn't pull him into the structure of the pyramid of heaven and earth. With such a judgment, it wasn't too difficult to deduce the current conclusion. The transportation network layer existed entirely for the purpose of connecting many worlds. Although the world created by the creator of this perfect world was only at the edge of the transportation network layer, and was hundreds of millions of nodes away from the central world of laws, the transportation network layer was still connected to the transportation network layer. However, the creator of this perfect world was still able to sense the existence of the world of laws immediately. What a world! Although it can't be compared to my previous perfect world, it has boundless potential. I'm afraid it won't be long before it'll be comparable to my previous perfect world. Looking at the world, the creator of the perfect world couldn't help but sigh in admiration. At this moment, the heaven and earth pioneer who tried to rope in the perfect heaven and earth pioneer had already retracted his senses and stopped communicating with him. This naturally wasn't because he had failed to rope him in, but because the creator of the perfect world indicated that he needed to think about it before giving him an answer. At this moment, although the world of laws was being probed again and again, and there were even vague perceptions and gazes constantly attacking it, the world of laws remained the same. Compared to before, it was even more resplendent and mysterious. Chapter 28:37. This world was obviously completely different from any world that the perfect heaven and earth creator had seen in the past. It felt like the other worlds were like dead things. Once they appeared, they were completely fixed and could no longer be changed. However, this world in front of him was like a living creature full of vitality. It seemed to be getting stronger and more perfect with every passing moment. This world felt even stronger than the perfect heaven and earth he had seen in the past. How can such a world exist? Seeing this world, the perfect heaven and earth creator was shocked. He even felt that his worldview had almost been overturned. Vaguely, he had already understood why this so-called transportation network layer could actually transcend the structure of the pyramid of heaven and earth. With such a world standing at the peak, the countless worlds naturally wouldn't be controlled by other worlds. Immediately after, he felt an inexplicable worry in his heart. What exactly has happened to this world? Why are the other worlds so hostile towards it? They've actually united to the point of wanting to probe it? Compared to the other world creators, the perfect heaven and earth creator who had just joined the transportation network layer was full of curiosity and awe for the world of laws. Perhaps he even had the idea of exploring its secret. However, this idea wasn't so strong that he wanted to break down the world of laws. Therefore, at this time, when he discovered that almost all the world creators in the entire transportation network layer were hostile to the world of laws and were planning to go forward and devour it, he instead stood on the side of the world of laws and was worried for it. The transportation network layer was countless times more lively than the other layers that simulated the state of chaos. At every moment, there were all kinds of things happening between worlds, all kinds of exchanges and cooperation that couldn't appear in the other layers that simulated the state of chaos were happening all the time. In fact, the path that should have been a place for many living beings to come and go had been transformed into various relay stations and markets due to the power of the world's founders. There were many living beings bustling about at all times, making the entire transportation network much livelier. The perfect heaven and earth creator was now extremely curious about everything in the entire transportation network layer. This kind of thing had never appeared in any other layer that simulated the state of chaos. The markets and stations outside of the world were obviously what he was most curious about. Hence, after the world settled down, he split out a clone and directly left his own world, stepping into the path of the transportation network layer. This path was in an extremely mysterious state. It was like heaven and earth, like time and space, like the world, and also like it was above everything. It seemed like it was in the primal chaos, but also seemed like it was outside the primal chaos. Any living being that stepped into it would feel as if they had stepped into a state of chaos. However, he would not suffer from the oppression and assimilation that he would inevitably suffer when he stepped into the state of chaos. This kind of feeling was enough to make those who were not founders of the universe feel despair. Stepping into this place did not feel much better than stepping into the true state of chaos. However, it was a feeling that could be easily endured by the world's creators. After all, the world creators were in direct contact with the state of chaos. They could clearly sense the corrosion, oppression, and assimilation of the state of chaos to their world at every moment. Compared to the corrosion, oppression, and assimilation of the world, what was the feeling of being in a state of chaos on the transportation network layer? Even if it was not even 1/10,000th of what they felt in the heaven and earth, hence, it was actually quite difficult for living beings who were not founders of the universe to travel on this path. At the very least, it was impossible for them to walk on this path without any protection like the world creators. Of course, difficulty was difficulty. Compared to the simulated state of chaos, having this path was already tens of thousands of times better for living beings who were not founders of the universe. At the very least, as long as they had a certain amount of protection, they would be able to endure this path. On the other hand, no matter how much protection they had in the simulated state of chaos, as long as they could not become world creators and could not obtain the world they created to protect themselves, they would not even have the ability to think. The perfect heaven and earth creator focused slightly and suppressed the various negative feelings that were produced when he stepped on the path. As a result, his senses also instantly returned to normal. After that, he began to travel market after market in the transportation network layer. The number of worlds in the transportation network layer was calculated in the hundreds of millions. Compared to the total number of worlds that the perfect heaven and earth creator had seen before, this number was naturally insignificant. However, compared to the living beings in any world, or even the creators of the world in the transportation network layer, this number was already an unimaginably huge number. To those living beings, the transportation network layer was not just a small place like the perfect heaven and earth creator at all. Instead, it was an extremely vast and boundless place that was like a supreme place above the heavens. Living beings who were not founders of the universe were filled with endless reverence for such a place. They understood everything here with reverence. Here, all their activities were carried out on the basis of following the rules of the transportation network layer itself. These markets and relay stations were also formed on this basis. Around those markets and relay stations there were all sorts of formations protecting them, causing those areas to be like space stations in the vacuum of the universe, forming an independent entity. All living beings entering and leaving these markets and relay stations were solemn, as if they had stepped into a forbidden zone for life. Legend has it that in the past, there were still some native races on the ancient road of chaos. However, at some point in time, they no longer appeared in front of people. In a certain market, the perfect heaven and earth creator was chatting with an old man. That old man was not the creator of heaven and earth, but rather an ordinary living being. Of course, he was only an ordinary living being compared to the world creators. In terms of the level of life, this old man's strength had already surpassed the false sage stage. His strength was definitely not weak in any world. It was said that this old man had already appeared when the market was established. After that, this market had experienced tens of millions of years, and he had stayed here for tens of millions of years. This old man's appearance was similar to that of a human, but it was a little different from the appearance of the born Taoism aptitude that Luo Fan recognized. It seemed that there were almost half more joints on his body, and his facial features also looked very strange. However, even in this form, he still exuded a perfect charm. Clearly, his appearance was also the appearance of the born Taoism aptitude of a certain world. It was also because of this that his appearance would not be rejected by any living being. After all, in this market, almost every living being came from a different world. Different worlds naturally had different pioneers of heaven and earth. With different world creators, the appearance of the born Taoism aptitude in their world would naturally be completely different. Among the different appearances of the born Taoism aptitude, there were too many appearances that were extremely perfect in the eyes of this world, but in the eyes of the living beings in other worlds, they were completely monsters. For example, in the eyes of a consummate heaven and earth creator, the old man's appearance was that of a monster. Of course, in the eyes of this old man, the appearance of the perfect heaven and earth creator was also a monster in the eyes of this old man. If it was purely in terms of appearance, it was already quite rare for any two creatures to not hate each other. If they wanted to truly interact with each other, or even establish friendship and open hearts, then that was practically impossible. However, all of this was based on appearance. With the additional identity of being the born Taoism aptitude of a certain world, any appearance would naturally have a perfect charm. This kind of perfection was enough to make an existence, no matter how picky they were about aesthetics, be able to sense the charm of other living beings that did not conform to their aesthetic standards. This was not because the world would add an invisible charm to the living beings after becoming the born Taoism aptitude of a certain world. Instead, after becoming the born Taoism aptitude of a certain world, this appearance would naturally begin to be incorporated into the world's own rules, laws, and even the operation of the Great Tao. Once this kind of operation was added, the born Taoism aptitude would naturally be gradually adjusted by the world. In the end, it would become incomparably compatible with the world, and even reflect the various mysteries of the world. Even the creator of the world had to go through the same process. Of course, for the world creators, this process would not happen outside of their senses like other living beings. Instead, it would happen directly within the scope of the world creator's control. In other words, this kind of adjustment could even be considered as the world's guidance, and the world creators would automatically adjust their bodies accordingly. Once this adjustment was completed, the appearance of a living being with a connate Taoism aptitude would naturally contain the profoundness and mysteries of the world. After all, compared to the consciousness of any living being, the world was still inherently stronger. The existence that reflected the world would naturally make living beings feel profoundness and mysteries. This combination of profoundness and mysteries was a kind of perfect charm. This was the fundamental reason why the form of a living being would naturally give off a sense of perfection after becoming the born Taoism aptitude of a certain world. It was precisely because of such a perfect existence that living beings of different appearances could successfully communicate with each other, and there would not be any obvious discrimination. Of course, it was just that there would not be too obvious discrimination. In the end, discrimination was inevitable. After all, the level of the world was different, so the perfect charm obtained by the born Taoism aptitude of the world would be different. Some worlds were more powerful and more perfect, so the perfect charm obtained by the born Taoism aptitude would be stronger. On the other hand, if the level of the world was not high enough, the perfect charm obtained by the born Taoism aptitude would naturally be weakened. The difference brought about by the difference in the world one came from was enough to make many living beings look at each other in a different light. As a result, invisible discrimination would appear. Compared to the discrimination that appeared because of region in ordinary worlds, this kind of invisible discrimination outside the world was more direct. If the perfect charm contained in one's appearance was inferior to others, it meant that the world one came from was inferior. If the perfect charm contained in one's appearance was superior to others, it meant that the world one came from was stronger than others. It could be said that in this world, one look was enough to determine whether one was at the top or the bottom of the chain of contempt. This was because two living beings only needed to meet for the first time to determine whether they were of the same level of origin. Naturally, they could also determine whether the two living beings could communicate equally. The meeting between the perfect world and the old man had also gone through this process. For the old man, he was extremely shocked when he saw the perfect world creator, and instantly raised the status of the perfect world creator to a new height. This was because the moment they met, he was already shocked by the perfect charm of the perfect world creator. This kind of perfect charm was the strongest among the countless living beings he had seen in the tens of millions of years in this market. Compared to the perfect world creator, the perfect charm of all other living beings was as disgusting as rotten meat. How powerful was the world to be able to bestow such perfect charm on one's appearance? If it was not for the fact that the perfect world creator's appearance was not human at all, he would have suspected that the perfect world creator had come from the world of laws. It was precisely because of this that he would reveal everything he knew to the creator of the perfect world before him. Is that so? There are actually native living beings? The perfect world creator was extremely curious. If there were native living beings outside other worlds that simulated the chaotic state, he would not be surprised. This was because the existence of other worlds that simulated the chaotic state allowed such a situation to occur. However, it was a little hard for him to imagine that there would be native living beings outside the transportation network layer. Chapter 2838. There are legends, and there are also some ruins that are suspected to be created by the natives on the ancient road. It's just that, from ancient times until now, no one has any clear evidence to prove that they've seen those natives with their own eyes. The old man sighed at the perfect world creator. Ruins? Are there any such ruins nearby? The perfect world creator asked curiously. The old man's expression changed slightly when he heard that. Fellow Taoist, could it be that you want to explore the ruins of the natives? Those ruins aren't simple. For us, it's a place of death. Even if 10,000 people go in, there might not even be one person who can come out alive. I advise fellow Taoist not to seek trouble for yourself. The perfect world creator became even more curious at this time. It was just a ruin, yet it was actually so dangerous. What was going on with the natives back then? As for the impact of this danger on him, he wasn't worried at all. After all, he was the perfect world creator. As the creator of a perfect world, although he had lost the world, all the improvements that he had obtained from the perfect world hadn't been reduced in the slightest. Under such circumstances, he was even confident that he could suppress the creator of the central world of laws. Not to mention the other world creators. With such confidence, no place in the transportation network layer was enough to make him feel apprehensive, even if it was a ruin that was said to have no chance of coming out alive. Fellow Taoist, you've misunderstood. I'm just curious. The perfect world creator smiled. The old man wasn't a fool, so how could he not see his nonchalant attitude? However, they had only met by chance. Although the old man thought highly of the perfect world creator because of his extreme charm and felt that it would be extremely beneficial for him to befriend him, he didn't say that he had a deep relationship with him. At this time, seeing that the other party wouldn't make sense no matter what he said, he naturally couldn't be bothered to continue pestering him. If you're courting death, I'm not obliged to hold you back. All of a sudden, his view of the perfect world creator was at least a level lower than before. However, although he no longer valued the perfect world creator as much as before, he couldn't fall out with him just like that. After all, no matter what, the creator of a perfect world came from such a powerful world. With such a background, even if he looked down on the other party, there was no need to offend him. As such, the old man did not say much after that. He simply pointed out the ruins of the native lifeforms in the vicinity to the great perfection world creator. He didn't say anything like, "It's best if you don't go anymore." Faced with such a situation, the grand perfection heaven and earth creator was happy and relaxed, pretending not to know. 2 to 4 hours later, he had obtained all the information that a perfect world creator needed. He didn't stay in this market any longer. He directly left the market and headed towards the ruins. It's a pity that he has such a background. The old man could not help but sigh as he watched him leave. In his opinion, this was the last time the creator of the perfect world would appear before him. The grand perfection heaven and earth creator naturally didn't care about the old man's pity. At this moment, his curiosity about the market had been completely replaced by curiosity about the native lifeforms. Living beings who were not creators of the universe were like blind people in the transportation network layer. However, for creators of the universe like them, the roads in the transportation network layer were so clear that they could even see the end of the road with a single glance. The ruins of the native lifeforms were hidden beside the road and existed on the road. At a glance, the ruins of the native lifeforms didn't seem special at all. It was just like the most normal road. Only by understanding the existence of such a relic could one discover the clues of its existence and confirm the existence of such a relic. It was precisely because of this that although the grand perfection heaven and earth creator could envelop the entire transportation network layer with his senses, he didn't discover the existence of such ruins at all. At this moment, the way the grand perfection heaven and earth creator looked at the transportation network layer underwent a subtle change. There seemed to be an indescribable fog shrouding the entire transportation network layer, covering every section of the road. There seemed to be layers of it, as if there were countless secrets hidden within. What a wonderful chaotic layer! It can actually give birth to so many unexpected existences. Native, are these living beings that were born specifically for the environment of this chaotic layer? Who created it? Which world creator? Or is it chaos itself? Or is it a predestined fate? Many thoughts flashed through his mind, and he yearned to see the so-called native lifeforms even more. Very soon, he arrived at the location of the ruins that the old man had mentioned. After carefully observing it according to the method that the old man had mentioned, he quickly determined the entrance to the ruins. Although the ruins were called ruins, they were actually some kind of strange spacetime that was attached to this road. This spacetime was extremely special. It used the transportation network layer as its foundation, and its quality was completely different from any other world. It felt like the embryonic form of some kind of world. That's right, it was the embryonic form of a world. After confirming this term, the grand perfection heaven and earth creator instantly felt that a large part of the fog in front of him seemed to have dissipated. These spacetimes were like some kind of world that had been established halfway before becoming powerless and could not continue to be established. This kind of spacetime essentially had the potential of a world, but it was specious. Because it was not fully developed, it behaved like a normal spacetime, and there was not much difference. In terms of nature, it did not exceed a normal spacetime too much. Perhaps I can transform this spacetime and turn it into a real world? This thought flashed through the grand perfection heaven and earth creator's mind, and he felt inexplicably excited for a moment. Of course, whether or not he would do it in the end and how he would do it would depend on what he saw and heard in the ruins. With that thought in mind, his powers surged, and he instantly broke through the barrier of the spacetime and stepped into it. The moment he stepped into the spacetime, he stirred up a gray existence, and an indescribably terrifying pressure was generated from all directions at this moment, constantly crushing him. In the blink of an eye, he felt that his body was withstanding a terrifying pressure that ordinary living beings could not bear, and cracking sounds kept spreading from his body. At this moment, he suddenly felt that he had returned to the state before he opened up the world. With a slight thought, a buzzing sound was produced from his body and began to spread in all directions, intertwining with the terrifying pressure around him. Finally, the pressure was removed, and his body and mind became empty at this moment. This was because he had materialized his own worldview and used it to protect himself, preventing himself from being hurt by the gray existence around him. This was also because the gray existence here was not a real simulation of the state of chaos, and the pressure he withstood here was ultimately not comparable to the pressure he withstood in the real simulation of the state of chaos. Otherwise, he would not have been able to use the materialization of this worldview to stop it. After all, if he could do that, why would he need to open up the world and drag himself down? This environment is indeed worthy of being a place where no one can survive. After everything stabilized, the grand perfection heaven and earth creator heaved a sigh of relief. This spacetime was extremely mysterious. The entire spacetime looked like a continent. There were all kinds of terrains on this continent, and there were even all kinds of indescribable living beings. There were even many that were clearly the creations of intelligent beings. Looking at the entire spacetime, there was a kind of ancient and boundless atmosphere that assaulted one's face. It really is the ruins of some kind of living being. After confirming the rumors, the grand perfection heaven and earth creator headed downwards. His current position in this spacetime was high up in the sky. The gray existence around him was actually the clouds of this spacetime, since he was interested in the so-called native lifeforms. His current landing point was a certain place in this spacetime that was clearly created by intelligent lifeforms. Just by coming here, he had already determined how strange those indigenous living beings were. Those indigenous living beings did not seem to have a fixed template at all. The forms of all living beings could actually be completely different. This could be clearly seen from the shape of the buildings in the ruins. Each building in the ruins was different from the others, and there could even be a huge disparity in size between them. This building was the residence of a giant, but the next building had become the residence of an ant. This was the residence of soft-bodied creatures, and the next was the residence of vacuum creatures. There were all sorts of different types of living beings. There were tens of thousands of buildings in the ruins, and the grand perfection heaven and earth creator had actually deduced the forms of tens of thousands of living beings that were suitable for these buildings. Completely different forms of living beings. Are they the creations of tribulations? Looking at this, he had a general idea of how the indigenous living beings were created. The living beings created by the grand perfection heaven and earth creator would definitely have the characteristics of the grand perfection heaven and earth creator. Either their form was similar to the grand perfection heaven and earth creator, or their own aesthetic sense was either suitable or against the grand perfection heaven and earth creator's aesthetic sense. Clearly, the tens of thousands of completely different forms of living beings in a single ruin did not fit with the characteristics of a grand perfection heaven and earth creator's creation. So, it was easy to imagine that these native living beings were either born naturally or created by the tribulations. Combined with the fact that these indigenous living beings had already disappeared, he was even more inclined to the possibility that they were the creations of tribulations. As long as there were traces, many things could be deduced. This was especially true for the grand perfection heaven and earth creator. Following this, he traversed the entire space-time and carefully studied all traces of the indigenous living beings that existed in this space-time. As he studied, he even reconstructed the scene of the indigenous living beings not disappearing and still existing in this space-time. Standing on a certain tower-like creation, the grand perfection heaven and earth creator's eyes seemed to have countless light and shadows flowing within them. In his eyes, the originally desolate space-time seemed to have returned to its original state of extreme prosperity. In a trance, there seemed to be countless strange living beings living at their own pace in this space-time. The existence of these countless living beings caused the entire space-time to become extremely lively and prosperous. At a certain moment, a ripple seemed to sweep past, and the countless living beings that were living according to their own rhythm in the space-time collapsed in an instant. The remnants after they collapsed were instantly sucked away by the ripple, completely disappearing from the space-time. This was the entire process of how all intelligent living beings in this space-time had disappeared based on the various traces that he had reconstructed. After a long while, the grand perfection heaven and earth creator sighed. What a pity! If this had continued, they might have been able to turn this place into a new world. He did not intend to receive an answer when he sighed, but an answer appeared in the next instant. That's impossible. Tribulations exist to destroy the world, so it's impossible for them to take the initiative to create a world. At this moment, a voice rang out in his ears. It instantly sent chills down his spine, and the warning signs in his heart rose to the limit in the blink of an eye. Who is it? The grand perfection heaven and earth creator shouted with a solemn expression. It went without saying how confident the grand perfection heaven and earth creator was. In his heart, he was the absolute peak existence in the entire transportation network layer. Even if all the grand perfection heaven and earth creators in the transportation network layer gathered together, they would not pose any threat to him at all. However, at this moment, there was suddenly an existence that could approach him without him sensing it at all. Furthermore, from the voice's words, it seemed that it had been there for quite some time and had even heard his own words. How could he not be nervous and shocked? At this moment, a humanoid figure appeared out of thin air not too far away from him. The figure was elegant and mysterious. Although it did not conform to the aesthetic standards of the grand perfection heaven and earth creator at all, the perfect charm that lingered around it was even stronger than his own. Chapter 2839. Heavenly Tao? How can a heavenly Tao appear in this space-time? Seeing this figure, the perfect heaven and earth creator was shocked. He was extremely knowledgeable, and he was extremely clear about the difference between heaven and earth creators and non-heaven and earth creators, as well as the difference between a normal being and a will that existed in the world. At that moment, when he saw the figure in front of him, he immediately realized that it was not the creator of the world. It was not even a natural living being that was born in a certain world. Instead, it was a will that existed in the world. It was the will of a heavenly Tao that did not exist in ordinary worlds, but existed in many worlds. The heavenly Tao was an existence that could only be born in a complete world. Moreover, it was not an ordinary world. It had to be a world that the creator of that world had agreed to be born in order to give birth to a true heavenly Tao. The space-time in front of him was not even a world, let alone a complete world. Even with billions of years of accumulation, it was impossible for a place like this to give birth to a heavenly Tao. As such, the appearance of the heavenly Tao completely overturned the stable worldview that the perfect heaven and earth creator had accumulated over billions of years. How could he not be shocked? I've been observing you for a long time. Although you're innately inferior to my creator, you have a special aura that my creator doesn't have. The heavenly Tao did not answer the perfect heaven and earth creator's question. At this moment, it only looked at the perfect heaven and earth creator curiously. It seemed to be talking to itself, but it also seemed to be waiting for the perfect heaven and earth creator's explanation. At this moment, the perfect heaven and earth creator's mood quickly calmed down. After all, he was experienced and knowledgeable. After the shock just now, he discovered more characteristics that belonged to the heavenly Tao. He understood that he had just misunderstood. Perhaps the existence in front of him was indeed a heavenly Tao, but it was not the heavenly Tao of this space-time. Instead, it was a heavenly Tao that belonged to a world outside of this space-time. Although it was strange that the heavenly Tao could leave the world it was born from, it was at least within the scope of his understanding. It was still within the scope of what his worldview could accept, and it would not shake his worldview. In this way, he was naturally much calmer. In the hearts of those who are created, their creator is extremely lofty and majestic. I can understand that, the perfect heaven and earth pioneer said as his expression returned to calmness. Is that so? I also hope that all of this is just my imagination. The heavens will only sighed, but did not refute the thoughts of the perfect creator of the world. These words made the perfect heaven and earth creator frown. These words were somewhat meaningful. A normal heavenly Tao would never have such expectations. It was just like how a normal heavenly Tao would not appear in a dangerous space-time outside the world. The aura on your body is very strange. Are you the so-called heavenly Tao of the world of laws? He carefully sensed the heavenly Tao and gradually discovered something. His expression changed abruptly. As expected, you are indeed extraordinary. You have completely surpassed all the other world creators in the transportation network layer, said the heavenly Tao with a smile. At this moment, he looked at the creator of the perfect world with even more curiosity. Evidently, the perfect heaven and earth creator's performance had piqued his interest. At this moment, the mood of the perfect world creator was definitely not as calm as it seemed on the surface. At this moment, what he had seen and heard after entering the transportation network layer flashed in his mind, and he suddenly felt an inexplicable pressure in his heart, as if a storm was brewing. You're actually here? What exactly happened to the world of laws? What about the creator of the world of laws? Is he dead or alive now? Or is he plotting something? Don't you know that if this continues, the entire transportation network layer might collapse if you're not careful? If this transportation network collapses layer by layer, then all of the worlds will lose their current freedom. The perfect world creator's expression changed, and he asked a series of questions in succession. Although he had only entered the transportation network layer for a short period of time, the perfect world creator was extremely satisfied with the existence of the transportation network layer. It could even be said that he was extremely glad that it existed. The world he had previously was a perfect world, a world that stood at the peak of the structure of the pyramid of heaven and earth. He had a clearer understanding of the structure of the pyramid of heaven and earth than any other creator of the world. The invisible shackles and invisible oppression of the higher world over the lower world could almost be said to have completely cut off all the channels of ascension of the world, causing any world to be unknowingly distorted by the higher world, gradually reducing its own potential. In the end, after reaching a certain level, it would naturally stagnate, unable to progress in the slightest. In fact, this was the fundamental reason why the previous world creators had dealt with the perfect world creator. This was because the perfect world creator had grasped a certain flaw in their world, and their further growth required the cooperation of the perfect world creator. Therefore, after discovering that there was something wrong with the perfect world creator, they didn't hesitate to attack him. If not for this, they would at least hesitate for a period of time and be at a loss for a period of time. Moreover, even if they attacked, it was impossible for every world creator who was qualified to attack. In contrast, the relationship between the many worlds in the transportation network layer was still the structure of the pyramid of heaven and earth. However, this pyramid of heaven and earth was tens of thousands of times smaller than the pyramid of heaven and earth that he had been in before. It could be said that the structure of the heaven and earth pyramid had no hope of transcending and breaking free from its restrictions. Then, there was almost a 20 to 30% chance of transcending and breaking free from the pyramid structure of the transportation network. From having no hope at all to having a 20 to 30% chance of success, such a large improvement was enough to make anyone overjoyed. That included the creator of this perfect world. If his heaven and earth were still a perfect heaven and earth, his heaven and earth would be at the pinnacle of the heaven and earth pyramid without any shackles and shackles. Instead, it would be the kind of existence that would impose shackles and shackles on other heavens and earth. Naturally, he wouldn't need to worry about the shackles of the heaven and earth pyramid structure. Even after his perfect world was devoured and he created a new world that inherited the perfect characteristics of the perfect world, his position in the structure of the heaven and earth pyramid was still the same as that of the previous perfect world. He was still at the peak of the structure of the heaven and earth pyramid and was not shackled or restricted by anything. He only shackled and restricted other worlds. However, when he removed all the characteristics related to a perfect world from his newly created world, the situation was completely different. From then on, his position in the new world had fallen to the bottom of the structure of the heaven and earth pyramid. There were countless worlds that could surpass his heaven and earth, and the number of worlds that could impose shackles on his heaven and earth was almost endless. If he hadn't been guided into the transportation network layer, how could the shackles that were imposed on his heaven and earth be so few? Perhaps the great Tao of his heaven and earth had already become a shackle cocoon. Even if he removed all the characteristics that belonged to a perfect world and completely broke away from the structure of the heaven and earth pyramid, it was only temporary. After completely removing the characteristics that belonged to a perfect world, this part of the heaven and earth had already become broken. If he wanted to continue to exist and protect himself, he needed to become complete again. He needed to use all kinds of other characteristics to make up for the defects that had been removed. And these supplementary characteristics would almost certainly resonate with some of the worlds in the structure of the heaven and earth pyramid. Then, they would be reconnected to the structure of the heaven and earth pyramid and become one of the worlds at the bottom. Compared to being directly destroyed by the creators at the top, this outcome was naturally countless times better. However, compared to having a 20% to 30% chance of truly transcending and completely getting rid of all restrictions and shackles, that outcome was extremely unacceptable. Therefore, it could be said that he was the last thing that all the creators, even all the living beings and wills in the transportation network layer, wanted to see: the destruction of the transportation network layer. Under this kind of attention, the focus of his attention now instantly shifted from how strong the creator of the heaven and earth pyramid was to what exactly he was plotting. You think this is freedom, but for others they don't care about their current encounters and freedom at all. The heavenly Tao smiled. He felt that the creator of the heaven and earth pyramid in front of him was more and more interesting. Such a powerful existence was secondary. The most important thing was that he actually felt that the many worlds in the transportation network layer in front of him had freedom. After all, if he wanted to, he could even completely destroy a large piece of the world with a single slap. Under such a threat, who could go against their conscience and say that they had freedom? However, he could clearly feel that this person's words were completely from the bottom of his heart. He truly believed from the bottom of his heart that the creators of the world in the transportation network layer had a rare freedom. How could this not make him feel that this situation was interesting? The perfect world creator said with a solemn expression, "They don't think so because they don't know how desperate the worlds outside the transportation network layer are. Once they know, they will understand how much freedom they have." It seems that fellow Taoist knows a lot of things. For example, how about meeting my main body? The heavenly Tao suddenly extended an invitation. Main body? The perfect world creator was slightly taken aback. Then, he discovered that the heavenly Tao in front of him was actually not the real heavenly Tao, but just an incarnation of the heavenly Tao. This discovery made him even more aghast. One had to know that his eyesight was powerful, which could be seen from the fact that he was able to recognize the heavenly Tao as soon as he laid eyes on it. However, even with such eyesight, he actually didn't discover that the figure in front of him was not the heavenly Tao true body, but just an incarnation of the heavenly Tao. How could he not be shocked? It wasn't that he had been deceived, but that the incarnation of the heavenly Tao in front of him was simply too solid and real. It exuded the real charm that belonged to the true body, and the illusory charm that belonged to the incarnation almost didn't exist at all. If the incarnation of the heavenly Tao hadn't revealed this answer on its own, even now, the perfect world creator probably wouldn't have been able to discover this illusory charm and truly connect it to the incarnation. At this moment, the perfect world creator finally began to take seriously what the incarnation of the heavenly Tao had said at the beginning, that he couldn't compare to its creator. Go to the world of laws? At this moment, he became increasingly curious about the creator of the world of laws. The creator was stronger than him, but the world he created had actually only survived the third great tribulation. The disconnect between the world and his own strength was something he couldn't understand. For a moment, he even felt that being able to obtain some benefits from the creator of the world of laws might be more valuable than maintaining the transportation network layer. You can say that. The incarnation of the heavenly Tao smiled slightly. Then, he raised his hand and the space-time in front of him instantly split apart. A passage leading to the endless distance appeared in front of him out of thin air. After seeing the passage appear, the incarnation of the heavenly Tao stepped into it without any hesitation and disappeared from this space-time in the blink of an eye. At this moment, the perfect world creator hesitated for a moment. But very soon, he suppressed all his hesitation and also stepped into the passage, heading towards the endless distance. In fact, his hesitation at this moment was the greatest fear he had for the creator of the world of laws. After all, he was only an incarnation at this moment. His real body was still in the world that he had opened up. Under such circumstances, even if his incarnation suffered any damage, his true body wouldn't be affected at all. Even under such circumstances, he was still hesitant about whether he should send this clone to the other party's territory. This was sufficient to show how wary he was of the creator of the world of laws. Chapter 2840. This is the world of laws? The creator of the perfect world couldn't help but ask as he looked at the misty world around him. If the world of laws could become the core world of the transportation network layer and become a world that was above all the other worlds here, its various laws should be quite perfect, right? However, looking at the world in front of him, It didn't seem like a world with perfect laws at all. This is just a parallel spacetime of the world of laws. At this moment, a familiar voice entered his ears. This voice was quite similar to the voice of the heavenly Tao, but there was a faint, inexplicable difference. At this moment, the surrounding mist condensed slightly, and a figure emerged from it. From the looks of it, it seemed to be no different from the incarnation of the heavenly Tao from before. However, upon closer inspection, one would discover that there was an indescribable sense of reality to it. In contrast, the incarnation of the heavenly Tao from before was like a shadow, while this figure was the real body, heavenly Tao. The creator of the perfect world pondered. That's me, creator of the perfect world. Why would I appear in such a small place? The heavenly Tao smiled at the creator of the perfect world. His eyes seemed to see through all the secrets of the creator of the perfect world. The expression of the creator of the perfect world changed slightly. He didn't expect the heavenly Tao to be able to discover his essence, and to have such a clear understanding of the entire simulated chaotic state. He knew that this was just a small place. What perfect world? I don't understand. He immediately said. Even I can see the charm of perfection on your body even if I'm blind. However, why is your world so bad? Isn't a perfect world supposed to be a world that has survived 9 great tribulations? Or did you encounter a tribulation? The heavenly Tao asked curiously. He didn't listen to the creator of the perfect world explain how he got the charm of perfection. He had completely tacitly agreed that the creator of the world in front of him was from a perfect world. Looking at the heavenly Tao who was completely certain of everything, the creator of the perfect world knew that no matter what he said, he could only sigh inwardly. 9. How did you come to this conclusion? The creator of the perfect world was suddenly stunned, and he was confused by the number that the heavenly Tao mentioned. The perfect world had to survive 9 great tribulations? Where did this number come from? Why didn't anyone tell him? Isn't that so? Tiandao could not help but feel curious. Although the heavenly axiom had gained a lot of general knowledge from Luo Fan and understood the vastness of the simulated state of chaos, as well as the terror of the structure of the pyramid of heaven and earth, his own limitations ultimately forced him to guess all of this through guesses. As for the structure of the real heaven and earth pyramid, one could only roughly guess what it looked like in one's mind. As for the actual situation, whether or not the structure of the heaven and earth pyramid was as he thought, this was something he could not be sure of. According to the general knowledge given to him by Luo Fan, the heaven and earth pyramid should have a structure of 9 layers. The first heaven and earth tribulation was the first layer, the second layer was the second layer, and so on until the 9th layer. It should be the 9th layer. After all, this simulated primal chaos state was not the true primal chaos state. At this stage, the world could not transform into a big world. Therefore, there would probably be a world in a perfect state that was the perfect world. Before this, he had such an understanding of the structure of the heaven and earth pyramid. Therefore, after discovering that the creator of the heaven and earth had such a strong aura of perfection, he boldly guessed that the creator of the heaven and earth pyramid should have a perfect world. This kind of perfect world should have stood at the peak of the structure of the heaven and earth pyramid. How could it suddenly become a world that had survived a great tribulation and appear in the transportation network layer? He was extremely curious about this. He even felt that this might be a good opportunity for him to see the entire simulated primal chaos state clearly. Of course not, the creator of the perfect world sighed. The only thing this primal chaos can endure is the 7th great tribulation of the world. Any world that passes through the 7th great tribulation will be truly perfected. Of course not. Even now, he still felt extremely regretful about this. These days, he kept thinking about the whole process of triggering the Great Tribulation to attack the perfect world. In the end, he found that there was no problem with his actions at all. The real problem was actually this state of primal chaos. If this chaotic state wasn't limited to the current level of endurance and couldn't withstand higher tribulations of the world, his previous actions would have definitely allowed his world to successfully survive the eighth tribulation of the world. It was also because of this failure that he was truly sure that the tolerance of this state of primal chaos was limited. A perfect world that had survived 7 great tribulations was actually already at the peak of primal chaos, 7 times. The heavenly Tao frowned at this moment. This answer was far too different from what he had guessed before. This is the parallel universe of the heaven and earth of laws? The creator of the perfect world did not dwell too much on the problem of the number. A failure was a failure, and even if he continued to dwell on it, time would not flow backwards. That's right. Although it looks different from the main body, it is indeed a part of the heaven and earth of laws. The heavenly Tao came back to his senses at this moment and smiled. He had some inexplicable guesses in his heart about the number of 7 times. He felt that it might have something to do with his creator, Luo Fan. The reason why he had such a guess was naturally because only Luo Fan could come up with a judgment that there were 9 great tribulations. This kind of deduction was completely from the bottom of his heart. It was as if he had seen such a world before and had absolutely sufficient evidence to prove this point. But now what he was deducing was actually not the truth. In such a situation, if it was an ordinary person, they would naturally suspect that Luo Fan was wrong. His deduction was merely a deduction formed from a wrong idea. However, the heavenly Tao was obviously different. It was not only because Luo Fan was his creator, and he was born with a supreme majesty that was above him. It was also because as Luo Fan's creation, he was extremely clear about how high Luo Fan's strength and realm were. Not to mention anything else, this heaven and earth of laws had clearly far surpassed all the worlds he had seen before. In fact, the appearance of the perfect creator of the world made him even more certain of this point. If it wasn't for the fact that this heaven and earth of laws was much stronger than the worlds created by the perfect creator of the world, why would the perfect creator of the world appear here? Why would he appear in front of him just because of an invitation? And how could Luo Fan, who had such a realm, be so calm about a wrong idea? Since it wasn't Luo Fan who was wrong, it was obvious that there was only a problem with the simulated chaotic state in front of them. No one felt that something was wrong except for one person. In that case, was this abnormality related to everyone, or was it related to the person who discovered it? It wasn't difficult to make such a judgment. Therefore, the heavenly Tao believed that the world in this simulated chaotic state could only withstand 7 great tribulations of the world. This might be related to Luo Fan. It might even be because of him that the number of great tribulations of the world that the world could withstand was reduced by 2, pulling a parallel existence to the same level as the main body of the world. I can't compare to such a method. The perfect creator of the world sighed. That's natural, the heavenly Tao said without hesitation. It was just like how it was normal for the perfect creator of the world to admit that he was inferior to Luo Fan. Hearing this, the perfect creator of the world's expression froze slightly. Aren't you afraid that I'm just being humble? However, thinking about the comparison between his perfect world and the world in front of him, he knew that he wasn't being humble at all compared to his perfect world. The world in front of him was only lacking a few times the world's tribulations. As long as the number of the world's tribulations could keep up, this world would be enough to easily crush his perfect world. All right then, can I meet the creator of this world? The perfect creator of the world sighed. Although communicating with the heavenly Tao was enough for him to gain a lot and learn many things that he didn't know or couldn't be sure of before. No matter what, he still wanted to meet the creator of the heavenly Tao. After all, the other party was also a world creator, and he was also a world creator. Even if there might be some differences in level, they could still be considered the same kind, and it might be more convenient to communicate. In comparison, the heavenly Tao was a level apart. That's impossible. The heavenly Tao shook his head. Is he unwilling or can't he? The perfect creator of the world frowned. Would you believe me if I said he can't? The heavenly Tao asked with a smile that didn't seem like a smile. At this time, how could the numerous founders of the heavens and earth in the entire transportation network layer not know about the situation within the world of laws? They wanted to find out about Luo Fan's situation. The heavenly Tao had countless incarnations scattered outside, so how could they not know? Under such circumstances, even if he didn't think that the perfect creator of the world would conspire with them, it was impossible for him to directly tell him the answer they wanted to probe. Logically speaking, the perfect creator of the world wouldn't conspire with them, but what if? The trust between him and the perfect creator of the world hadn't reached that level yet, and it wasn't good to talk too deeply with a shallow acquaintance. I kind of believe it. The perfect creator of the world smiled bitterly. Indeed, as long as Luo Fan didn't appear in front of him, no matter what reason the heavenly Tao gave, whether it was because he couldn't, was unwilling, or simply had some difficulties, he wouldn't completely believe it. The heavenly Tao naturally knew what he meant. The perfect creator of the world instantly changed the topic and asked, "All right, then you didn't make me appear here just to satisfy my curiosity, did you? I want to know the true state of chaos." The heavenly Tao smiled. The true state of chaos? Then I think you found the wrong person. I used to think that I knew a lot, but now I realize that what I know is just a drop in the ocean of chaos. Perhaps I know a little more than the average creator of the world, but I'm still countless light years away from the true state of chaos. The perfect creator of the world smiled bitterly. This wasn't an excuse, but what he really thought. If there was a simulated chaos layer like the transportation network layer here, then what about outside of it? Apart from this simulated chaos layer that he didn't know about before, were there any other simulated chaos layers that Ji Hong didn't know about before? Was the world bigger than the transportation network layer, or smaller than the transportation network layer, or was it simply bigger than the structure of the pyramid of heaven and earth that he knew before? In fact, was he the only creator of a perfect world in this simulated state of chaos? Was the perfect world he had cultivated before just one of the countless perfect worlds in this simulated state of chaos? In the past, he felt that the answer was no. He was already the strongest and the pinnacle existence in this simulated primal chaos state. The perfect world that he had nurtured was the only perfect world in this simulated primal chaos state. But now, he just felt that perhaps he was just a frog at the bottom of a well. Perhaps, in this simulated chaos, he was just one of the countless perfect world creators. If that was really the case, then the structure of the pyramid of heaven and earth that he originally knew, which contained almost all the worlds in the simulated chaos, might only exist based on his perfect world. Perhaps there were countless structures of the pyramid of heaven and earth outside of the pyramid of heaven and earth. Perhaps your knowledge is indeed limited, but you have to admit that your knowledge may also be the true chaos. This possibility at least exists. The heavenly Tao smiled. All right, since you're interested, I naturally won't be stingy to tell you what I know. But what can I get out of it? Only by reciprocating could friendship be established. It can't be that I tell you what I know, but I can't get anything out of it at all, right? That's not how things should be done. The perfect creator of the world readily accepted the good advice and smiled. Chapter 28:41. When the perfect world creator heard this, he could not help but feel delighted. At the same time, he admired the heavenly Tao's desire to seek the Tao. One must know that the heavenly Tao's expression was not simple. It represented that the perfect world creator could speak at will. Normally, when it came to memories or other intangible information, every existence would have their own estimated value. Once the value exceeded this value, even if it was just a little bit, they would not be willing to trade at all. However, the heavenly Tao was obviously not like that. To him, the information and memories could be traded for everything. This was not an attitude that ordinary people could have. How could he not admire this? After all, even he couldn't do that. At this moment, the perfect world creator completely understood what he should ask for. Immediately, he smiled and said, "If that's the case, then what I want is all your memories apart from this." Hearing this, the heavenly Tao was not moved at all. Just as the perfect heaven and earth creator had thought, the information that the perfect heaven and earth creator possessed was extremely important to him. At least, that was what he thought. Therefore, after making that promise, he had already prepared for the worst. Trading all of his memories was also one of the many preparations he had made. In fact, this was not even the worst of his plans. Since that was the case, he naturally would not have any special expression at this moment. Then, he said, "Sure, no problem at all. But since you asked for this, I also have a request." "In that case, I also have a request. Your information must be in the form of all your memories other than." Hearing this, the perfect world creator's expression changed slightly. This request was somewhat out of his expectations. At least, before this, he did not expect the heavenly Tao to make such a request. However, thinking about it carefully, it was reasonable for the heavenly Tao to make such a request. After all, carrying the information in the form of all of his memories was actually within the scope of the heavenly Tao's previous request. It was just a slightly excessive request. However, if this excessive request was compared to the perfect world creator's previous request, then this request was actually on the same level. "Since you want my memories, what's wrong with me asking for your memories?" The perfect world creator looked at the heavenly Tao with an inexplicable gaze, his eyes filled with speechlessness. "I actually admired you just now," he sighed. "Oh, it's really my honor," the heavenly Tao said without any sincerity. The creator smiled helplessly. Then, just as the heavens will thought that he was going to change his request, he unexpectedly said, "No problem, I agree to your request. Let's settle this deal then." Tiandao only smiled and said, "I thought you would refuse. What a pity, I've already prepared other conditions." Hearing this, the perfect world creator remained expressionless. Since he had already made up his mind, there was no way he would change his mind. Moreover, he could clearly tell that the heavenly Tao was just speaking casually. If he really changed his mind, he would probably dissuade him immediately. As for why he agreed to this deal, the reason was that he had already thought it through. When it came to memories, handing them over to others would obviously not change them. His memories were still his memories. As for the fact that almost everything about him was known by others due to his memories being spied on, he didn't care at all. He wasn't the kind of existence that had a huge flaw. That kind of existence, once seen through by others, would be fatal. To him, if others could see through him, it would only make them admire him more. As for flaws and what-not, it had nothing to do with him. Under such circumstances, he obviously didn't need to care that his memories would be spied on by others. Of course, this didn't mean that he wanted to spread his memories everywhere. "You want my memories? Sure, show me what qualifications you have. If you have the qualifications, then you can peep into my memories at any time. However, if you don't have the qualifications, then you can go back to where you came from." Obviously, the various actions of the heavenly Tao showed that he had the qualifications. At this time, the situation of the world of laws had already made him extremely curious. If he could obtain the memories of the heavenly Tao here, it would mean that he had obtained all the secrets of the world of laws. Compared to this, what was having his memories spied on? It was precisely because of this that he immediately agreed to this deal that seemed to be at a disadvantage. At this time, the perfect world creator admired the heavenly Tao very much because of his heart towards the Tao. But on the other hand, the heavenly Tao also admired the perfect world creator. Very few people could weigh their gains and losses as soberly as the heavenly Tao. Many people clearly didn't suffer any losses, and the transaction was completely profitable. However, when they thought that the other party in the transaction had gained more than them, they felt that they had suffered a great loss. They would rather not gain anything than let the other party gain anything. Obviously, this was an extremely stupid behavior, but it was indeed a choice that ordinary people would make. However, the perfect world creator obviously didn't do this. This was under the circumstances where he had obviously paid countless times more than the heavenly Tao. This was enough to show how wise he was, and the heavenly Tao couldn't help but admire him. Since they had already agreed on the transaction method, there was naturally nothing more to say next. Of course, it was time to start the transaction. And this transaction of exchanging memories obviously couldn't be like the transaction of other things. You take it out and give it to me, and I take it out and give it to you. They were talking about memories, and nothing else. Moreover, it wasn't just simple memories, but memories that needed to be eliminated, and memories that needed to be condensed. Such a transaction required a lot of preparation no matter what. It was definitely not easy to complete. Therefore, at this time, they began to condense their own memories. This was a huge project. Naturally, there was nothing more to say about the perfect world creator. He had lived for billions of trillions of years. Even if he only had one thought every year, the memories that he had produced over billions of trillions of years were enough to make anyone explode. What's more, as the creator of the world, the thoughts that came to his mind at every moment could be counted in the billions. In this way, it went without saying how huge the project was for him to condense his own memories. It could be said that if he didn't condense his memories enough, this transaction wouldn't be a transaction, but a massacre. The moment he handed over the memories to the heavenly Tao, the memories would instantly cause the heavenly Tao to collapse. This result seemed unbelievable. After all, in terms of essence, the heavenly Tao didn't have too many perfect world creators, and the heavenly Tao should be able to bear the memories that perfect world creators could bear. However, this was actually very natural. It was just like how a person couldn't eat a year's worth of food in one meal. A person also couldn't bear the memories that had been accumulated over a long period of time. The heavenly Tao was Luo Fan's creation, and various signs showed that, apart from the fact that Luo Fan didn't have the perfect charm given by the simulated chaotic state, he was stronger than the perfect world creators. Moreover, he was much stronger. Under such circumstances, the heavenly Tao that Luo Fan used to manage the world naturally couldn't be too weak. It could even be said that he could be said to be the pinnacle of Luo Fan's creation. It wouldn't be too much to say that such an existence was stronger than the perfect world creators. It was actually conservative to say that he wasn't much weaker than him. Such an existence's ability to bear memories naturally wouldn't be much worse than the perfect world creators. But even so, if all the memories of the perfect world creators were to be poured into the heavenly Tao's mind, it would actually be equivalent to eating something that would take him hundreds of millions of years to eat in an instant. That would obviously be murder. Therefore, at this time, the perfect world creators could only work hard to condense their own memories. Moreover, it was extremely condensed. Only by condensing it to the extreme would it be possible for his memories to be safely accepted by the heavenly Tao. It was just like how a person couldn't eat a year's worth of food in one meal, but could eat exotic flowers and fruits that were equivalent to the total nutrition of a year's worth of food. At this time, the condensation he was carrying out was equivalent to condensing countless nutrients into exotic flowers and fruit. This technique was quite not simple. However, for the perfect world creators, it wasn't difficult at all. It was just that it was quite troublesome. For the perfect world creators, this was an extremely complicated process. For the heavenly Tao, this process was also extremely difficult. The memories of the perfect world creators were accumulated bit by him. At least, that was what he thought. This kind of memory was still considered familiar to him. It wasn't too difficult to condense it. However, the heavenly Tao was different. Where did his memories come from? Most of his memories were instilled into him by Luo Fan when he was created. For him, such memories were always separated by a layer no matter when. This kind of barrier was usually nothing to the heavenly Tao. The heavenly Tao could completely use these memories. It could even use these memories to create new ones. However, when it came to condensing memories, this kind of gap was quite fatal. This was because it was obvious that he only knew how most of his memories were, but didn't know why they were. Knowing how but not why they were was like an alchemist who didn't know the properties of a medicine. Under such circumstances, it went without saying how difficult it was to condense these memories. Therefore, although the heavenly Tao's memories were many times less than the perfect world creator's, however, the one who condensed his memories even faster was the perfect heaven and earth creator. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. After 100 years of condensation, the perfect world creators had already condensed more than 30% of his memories. Although the speed of condensation was getting slower and slower, it seemed that he should be able to complete the entire condensation process within 3,000 years. On the other hand, the heavenly Tao's situation was completely different. Although his own memories were tens of thousands of times less than those of the perfect world creators, the memories that he had condensed over the past 100 years were only less than 10% of all his memories. This speed was more than 3 times slower than the perfect world creators. If the perfect world creators could complete the entire condensation process within 3,000 years, then he would probably need more than 10,000 years to complete it. Moreover, this was under the condition that the speed of condensing memories would not be further reduced. If the speed was further reduced, the time needed would probably be even longer, and it might not even be completed in hundreds of thousands of years. On this day, the consummate world creator suddenly said, "You seem to be moving very slowly." Hearing this, the heavenly Tao did not hide anything and said, "Isn't that normal? Most of my memories are instilled by the Creator, so it's naturally extremely difficult to condense them. Being able to be this fast is already the result of my hard work." The reason why he did not hide anything was not because he was honest, but because he clearly knew that this fact was not a deduction for the perfect world creators, but a solid plus. This was because the goal of the perfect world creators was to obtain Luo Fan's memories. The perfect world creators exchanged memories with the heavenly Tao. Could it be that they were really interested in what the heavenly Tao had experienced? Did they want to see the heavenly Tao's control over the world of laws? Obviously, they were not. What he was concerned about was the secrets of the world of laws contained in these memories. This was the fundamental reason why the world of laws was so mysterious, and why it could transcend the structure of the pyramid. Under such circumstances, the memories of a world creator like Luo Fan were obviously more valuable than the heavenly Tao's memories. Therefore, the perfect world creators would not feel impatient when the heavenly Tao said this. Instead, it would make them look forward to those memories even more. They would also have more patience to wait for those memories to arrive. It was precisely because of this that the heavenly Tao honestly revealed the fact that most of his memories were instilled by Luo Fan. Sure enough, the perfect world creator's eyes lit up when they heard this, and they instantly smiled. "All right, since that's the case, no matter how long it takes, I will wait for you." The heavenly Tao smiled. "Then I can rest assured. However, at this speed, you might have to wait for a long time." Hearing this, the perfect world creators didn't care at all. "It doesn't matter. Even if it's slow, it doesn't matter as long as it can arrive in the end. Anyway, to us, time is nothing more than an attribute that can be modified at will." Could it be that you chose this parallel universe for this? At the end of his words, the perfect world creator's expression changed slightly. If the heavenly Tao really predicted that he might exchange memories with him, wouldn't that mean that the heavenly Tao's calculation ability was far above his own? All of his thoughts had been calculated by him before they met. Chapter 2842. Compared to the main body of the world, the parallel universe had a special characteristic. Its time had nothing to do with the main body of the world. In other words, no matter how much time had passed in the main body of the world, only a moment had passed in this parallel universe. Or perhaps, on the other hand, countless years had already passed here, the main body of heaven and earth only passing for an instant. In this way, this place was equivalent to having an infinite amount of time, especially when this place was under the control of the heavenly Tao. This parallel universe had such a characteristic, and the heavenly Tao needed such a characteristic. Even the weakest person would connect the two together, thinking that the heavenly Tao had done it on purpose and that everything was part of its plan. What's more, this perfect heaven and earth creator was not someone with poor imagination. At this moment, Tiandao only smiled and said, "It is my honor that you think so. However, it's a pity that you've overestimated me. Although my strength is greater than that of an ordinary creator, we're still at the same level. How could I have calculated all this beforehand?" As soon as he said this, the perfect heaven and earth creator's expression became much better. However, he still didn't say anything. He just looked at the heavenly Tao. Obviously, this kind of explanation still did not make him feel completely at ease. After all, the same level of strength did not mean the same means. And the result of the difference in methods could be the difference between heaven and earth. Heavenly Tao was aware of this as well, but he did not stop there. Instead, he continued, "The reason why I chose the parallel universe is indeed because I need to have sufficient time, but it's just a precaution." The perfected heaven and earth creator fell into deep thought and felt relieved. However, amidst his relief, he felt an inexplicable sense of disappointment. The heavenly Tao's explanation was indeed plausible. It was perfectly normal to make all the necessary preparations in one's own territory, even the most useless preparations. The creator of the perfect world should have been satisfied with this explanation. However, after confirming this explanation, the perfect heaven and earth creator felt a sense of loss. Only then did he realize that this was not the explanation he had hoped for. In fact, in his heart, what he was hoping for was for his guess to come true. To him, the significance of his conjecture coming true was not something the heavenly axiom could explain clearly. The heavenly Tao's successful explanation only meant that he had not been schemed against. If his guess was correct, it would mean that he was coming into contact with a powerful existence that was far beyond his imagination. Compared to this, being schemed against was actually just a small matter. At the very least, he would rather be schemed against than have his guesses go up in smoke. At that moment, he let out a sigh. Although the heavenly Tao was intelligent, it was not the worm in the heart of the creator of the perfected world. It would never have expected him to have such a mentality. At this time, it only felt that the behavior of the creator of the perfected world was rather strange, but it did not think too much about it. Next, the process that had been interrupted for a short while began to resume. Regardless of whether it was a perfect world creator or the heavenly Tao, the condensation of memories began to slow down significantly. To the heavenly axiom, after knowing that the creator of the perfect world was extremely patient, he naturally did not need to care about time at all. Instead, he did whatever was convenient and convenient. If that was the case, how could it not be slow? It was the same for those who had perfected the world. Since he already knew that the heavenly axiom would need more than 100,000 years to successfully condense its memories, why would he bother to complete the condensation in a few thousand years and then wait for the heavenly axiom in a days for hundreds of thousands of years? Wasn't this a loss to Huang? Thus, he was naturally as relaxed as he could be. This would also slow down the speed at which he condensed his memories. Time passed quickly, and before he knew it, 10,000 years had passed. After 10,000 years, the perfect world creator had clearly condensed all of his memories. At this moment, there was a ball of strange light slowly rotating in front of him. The light was so strange that it did not look like light at all. Instead, it looked like a world of its own. Within that light, there seemed to be countless lights and shadows constantly spinning. Those lights and shadows were so clear, and there were so many of them. At a glance, it was as if the universe had been compressed into a small dot at this moment. At another glance, it was as if he could see anything he wanted to see. This inconceivable aspect surpassed everyone's imagination. This was clearly the memory that he had condensed. This kind of memory was all-encompassing, containing everything that the perfect world creator had experienced in the past billions of trillions of years, as well as everything he had seen and experienced. Because of this characteristic, it could give people all sorts of inconceivable feelings. After doing this, the perfect world creator only felt satisfied. Originally, he had only spent so much time condensing his memories for the sake of making a deal with heaven's will. However, after he truly condensed his memories, he realized that the greatest benefit of condensing them was not the deal at all. Instead, it allowed him to reorganize his memories, allowing him to once again comprehend his countless years of cultivation experience, and relive all the emotions he had experienced back then. Compared to a deal, these various intangible gains were more valuable. This was what truly excited him. It could be said that even if heaven's will did not make a deal with him now, he would already be satisfied. He felt that his efforts over the years were not in vain. Looks like I still have a lot of undiscovered potential that I haven't discovered in the past. The perfect world creator thought to himself, and his heart was already filled with fighting spirit. With that thought, he looked at heaven's will, who was working hard to condense his memories like before, and already knew what he should do next. At that moment, his unique worldview began to appear in his heart. This worldview had previously created an incredibly powerful perfect world, and this made him treat this worldview as a perfect worldview for a rather long period of time. After all, if it was not a perfect worldview, how could it have been possible to create a perfect world? It could be said that this recognition came naturally when the conditions were right. However, this was obviously a wrong understanding. Whether it was what he had seen and heard in the world of laws or the memories he had reorganized before, the results were all telling him that his worldview was not perfect. There was no need to mention the situation of the world of laws. It was obviously more perfect than a perfect world in some aspect. If a world's worldview was more perfect than the worldview of other worlds, how could that world be inferior? From this, it could be seen that his worldview was not perfect. As for his memories, that was naturally because after he had recondensed his memories, he had also discovered many concepts in his worldview that could be modified. If even he could modify his own memories, how could his worldview be called perfect? How could an existence who could cultivate the world he had opened up to the level of a perfect world not know the importance of a worldview? Therefore, the perfect world creator was naturally very clear about how important his worldview was, and he completely understood that it was what he would rely on to move forward. Under such circumstances, was there any need to say what decision the perfect world creator would make when he had clearly discovered that there was a problem with his worldview? Therefore, next, the perfect world creator poured all his energy into perfecting his worldview. As he paid attention to his worldview, all kinds of indescribable insights instantly emerged from the bottom of his heart. It was a new insight that came from the depths of his heart, but it was also a subtle stimulation from the surrounding environment. However, it was difficult for him to determine whether it was his inner insight or the stimulation from the surrounding environment. However, there was not much difference between these two sources for him. For him, it was enough as long as he had insight. Along with this change, the brilliance in front of him constantly changed. The overall nature did not change, but the proportion of light and shadow within it was constantly changing. It was like a movie with a different director. This change was extremely mysterious and natural. It was as if this change was a completely natural development. Time flew by, and before he knew it, 10,000 years had passed. During these 10,000 years, the heavenly Tao had not changed at all, and it was exactly the same as 10,000 years ago. It was still working hard to complete its memory condensation project. Compared to before, it did not even emit any brilliance. This situation was enough to show that the memory condensation he had now was not even as good as the perfect world creator from tens of thousands of years ago. Back then, the perfect world creator who had only condensed 30% of his memory was like this. This might be because the overall amount of his memory was not as good as that of the perfect world creator, or because the proportion of his memory condensation was not as good as that of the perfect world creator. At this time, the brilliance in front of the perfect world creator was completely like a world. There, the brilliance had completely divided into countless types. The division of the brilliance was extremely strange. Among them, some turned into all things in the world, some turned into space-time, and some turned into laws. There were even countless living beings that appeared in the world that had been born from the brilliance. If it was not for the fact that they had already seen that the brilliance was condensed from memory, perhaps everyone would have thought that it was a world of its own. A world. At this time, the perfect world creator did not show any special behavior at all. He seemed to be cultivating and comprehending as usual. However, for some reason, the world that the brilliance of memory displayed seemed more and more familiar. It was as if it was gradually approaching a certain world. Facing this, the perfect world creator did not feel anything at all. The changes in the world could not be more normal in his eyes. Everything was happening within the scope of his comprehension. It seemed as if something was deceiving his senses. In fact, this was not an illusion. There was indeed something that was deceiving his senses. It was the thrill of improvement. Over the years, the perfect world creator had been immersed in the unknown source of his senses and did not pay much attention to the situation of his body. He did not even realize that his body was completely transforming into a human. He did not even realize that his body was changing, let alone anything else. So what if he ignored the changes in the brilliance of his memory? In the face of such a change, naturally, no one would notice it in the beginning. However, paper could not cover fire. As long as it was a change, it would eventually be discovered. Unknowingly, Tiandao frowned and suddenly noticed the existence of the change. For a moment, his mood became inexplicably complicated. The reason why it was complicated was that the change made him feel both happy and worried. He was happy because he knew the source of the change and knew that the source had always been in his hands. On the other hand, he was worried because the situation of the perfect world creator represented a fact. The thing that he wanted to use his memory to get rid of exceeded the scope of the perfect world creator's strength. His original plan could almost be said to have failed. This feeling of joy and worry filled his heart. How could Tiandao's expression not be complicated? That's right, the source of all this was actually very obvious. It was the world of laws. Or to be more specific, it was the world of laws. What was this place? This was the parallel universe of the world of laws. It was a parallel universe that was completely different from the main body of the world of laws, but its essence still belonged to the world of laws. In such an existence, everything in it clearly existed according to the world view of the laws. What did this mean? It meant that if someone was talented enough, they could even restore the world of laws from the parallel universe. Obviously, the perfect world creator was an existence with heaven-defying talent. For this existence, he was receiving information from the world of laws all the time, absorbing the crystallization of wisdom that belonged to Luo Fan. Obviously, the impact on him was too great. It was so great that even his own worldview had been affected. All the changes that appeared on the perfect world creator before were signs that his worldview had been affected and had even begun to be assimilated. In fact, if it weren't for his talent and comprehension as a perfect world creator, he wouldn't have been affected to this extent. It was precisely because his talent and perception were too strong that he obtained too much of the essence of the world of laws from this parallel universe. Therefore, in just a short period of 10,000 years, even his figure had been assimilated by the world of laws. The heavenly Tao didn't say anything about this change of the perfect world creator. The impact had already been formed. At this time, even if he reminded him, it would be useless. It was like a person who had lost a game. Reminding him that he had lost couldn't change the fact that he had lost. On the contrary, not telling him would allow him to maintain his fighting spirit, and maybe he wouldn't lose too badly in the end. Chapter 28:43. The creator of the perfect world was completely unaware of the heavenly Tao's dilemma. At this moment, he was still wholeheartedly immersed in reorganizing his worldview. In this process of reorganizing, he was constantly immersed in the pleasure of improvement. His entire body and mind seemed to be sublimating and evolving at every moment. In this sublimation and evolution, he felt that every moment was his lucky moment. How could he have the time to pay attention to anything else? If this continues, it won't be long before I can advance a step further and create a world that's close to perfection. The creator of the perfect world suddenly had this thought at a certain moment. With this thought in mind, he felt that he was even more motivated. Time passed by quickly, and before he knew it, tens of thousands of years had passed. During these tens of thousands of years, because the heavenly Tao felt that the future of trading was hopeless, the process of condensing its own memories became increasingly slow. According to the original plan, he would have condensed a rather obvious brilliance by now, and would have shown light and shadow similar to heaven and earth, or a world, or even space-time. However, due to the lack of motivation for trading, although he did not cut corners over the years, it was difficult for him to pour all his energy into condensing memories like before. Every once in a while, he would pay attention to the situation of the creator of the perfect world to see if he had come back to his senses, if he had discovered his abnormality, and if he could feel the changes in himself during the process. Under such circumstances, the speed at which he condensed memories was naturally much slower than before. With all these conditions intertwined, the result was that the speed at which he condensed memories was far behind his original plan. Therefore, after so many years, although his condensed memories had barely formed some brilliance in front of him, the brilliance had not even taken shape, let alone condensing space-time, condensing a world, condensing a heaven and earth. If it was before, even if the creator of the perfect world was very patient and felt that the longer he waited, the more advantageous it would be for him, he would definitely feel a lot of displeasure. After all, even if the brilliance of the memory had not been condensed, it was no longer an issue of slow speed. This was clearly cutting corners. However, this was only the original. Now that the perfect world was being established, how could he have the mood to pay attention to the heavenly Tao? To the current him, even if the heavenly Tao spent hundreds of millions of years, as long as he could still feel the omnipresent inspiration and still enjoy the pleasure of improving at every moment, it did not matter. Therefore, even if the heavenly Tao was obviously cutting corners, he still did not care, and did not show any dissatisfaction. When will he notice the changes in the situation? The heavenly Tao sighed inwardly. At this moment, he looked at the perfect world's creator as if he was looking at a tragedy that he had clearly fallen into a hopeless situation. In fact, it was not only him, but anyone who knew the perfect world's creator would also feel that he was in a tragedy. In fact, it didn't even need to be the world creator. For example, the old man who had chatted with the perfect world creator for a period of time in the trading center. The reason for this was because at this moment, the perfect world creator's appearance was no longer the same as when he was born. At this moment, his appearance had completely transformed into a human. That's right, it was not any other form, but the human form that Luo Fan had the innate Tao aptitude. At this moment, the perfect world creator that appeared in front of the heavenly Tao looked like the most ordinary young man, and there seemed to be nothing special about him, except for the brilliance that was like a world, like space-time, like heaven and earth condensed from memories. No one would be able to imagine that he was nothing more than a monster in the eyes of a humanoid creature. The appearance of this human form on the perfect world obviously represented the fact that at this moment, his worldview had been completely assimilated by the nomological worldview. At this moment, his worldview could be said to have completely turned into a lower worldview of the nomological worldview. In other words, although it had its own characteristics, it seemed to be a complete worldview that was basically passable and seemed to be true. However, in fact, such a worldview was only a corresponding variant of the nomological worldview. Even if the concepts seemed to be extremely independent and unique, on the whole, all of these concepts had already been covered by the nomological worldview. It was just like a middle school student. No matter how many ideas he had, no matter how new he deduced from the formulas and theorems in the textbook, no matter how complete and peerless the theory he deduced was. However, in the end, all of these would almost certainly be covered in a complete theory. Moreover, it would almost certainly be countless times cruder than that theory. Now, the worldview of the perfect world creator and the nomological worldview had the same relationship. If one looked at his worldview alone, it was indeed incomparably powerful and vast. It was even incomparably complete. However, as long as one put it together with Luo Fan's nomological worldview, one would find that this worldview was very familiar. The concepts in it seemed to be some kind of variant of the nomological worldview, and even their descriptions were extremely similar. At this moment, the heavenly Tao actually no longer had the mood to pay attention to his own memory condensation work. At this moment, almost 70% to 80% of his energy was focused on the perfect world creator. He was weighing how valuable the memory of the perfect world creator was to him. Finally, at a certain moment, the result of his weighing was completely revealed. And this result finally made him completely disappointed. I don't think there's any need to continue. At a certain moment, he let out a sigh and finally spoke, interrupting the incredibly excited grand completion world creator. The perfect world creator didn't hear what he said. He didn't even know the changes in his body, so how could he easily hear what the heavenly Tao was saying? At this time, facing such a perfect world creator, the heavenly Tao naturally wouldn't give up as easily as before. Then, he repeated this sentence several times in a row. Each time, he tried to increase the influence of his words as much as possible. He was constantly adding a shocking charm to his words. Finally, after he repeated his words 4 times, the perfect world creator finally heard his voice and gradually recovered from his almost bewitched state. After coming back to his senses, he still looked at the heavenly Tao with a blank gaze. It was as if he was still curious about what was wrong with the heavenly Tao. Why didn't he give up after waiting for so long? Why did he want to give up after completing the condensation work so leisurely? This was a little out of his expectations. You want to give up? The perfect world creator still didn't notice the changes in his body and looked at the heavenly Tao with an indescribable gaze. The heavenly Tao sighed and said, "It's not that I want to give up, but I think you should look at yourself first." The perfect world creator looked at himself with a slightly blank gaze. He still hadn't recovered from the restructuring of his worldview. At this moment, his body and mind were still completely within that worldview. To that worldview, although this human form wasn't the most perfect and appropriate state, it was a state that no matter how one looked at it, it would still faintly match. In other words, other forms might not meet the most perfect requirements described by that worldview. However, to this human form, there wouldn't be any problems in any worldview, and there wouldn't be any incompatibility. It was precisely because of this that he would unknowingly turn his body into this human form. After all, there were so many worldviews in a worldview. Even if there was only a small requirement for the body form among the millions of worldviews, the countless worldviews in a worldview would be enough to completely determine the form of that life form. During this process, the creator of perfect worlds had clearly considered every single form of the figure bit by bit. He had studied it carefully and experienced it carefully before deciding on its form. He didn't think too much about the final form. On the contrary, when he looked at these, he only saw the details of these forms. He even recalled the process of going through countless wrong forms before finally deciding on the details of this form. As such, he naturally didn't notice anything wrong with this form of his. It was precisely because of this that he seemed a little lost at this moment. However, a perfect world creator was a perfect world creator after all. Although he felt a little lost, he still knew that the heavenly Tao wouldn't speak carelessly. Since it said so at this moment, it was obvious that there was something wrong with his body. At this moment, he began to carefully recall and compare. After a while, his expression suddenly changed, and he turned to look at the heavenly Tao. He looked at the heavenly Tao, who was looking at him with an inexplicable gaze. When he saw the appearance of the heavenly axiom, his expression suddenly changed drastically. "You're scheming against me?" His expression became extremely sinister. At this moment, his aura rose frantically, and an incomparably terrifying impact began to surge around his body. In an instant, the heavenly Tao discovered why the perfect world creator was a perfect world creator. Although this was the world of laws, a place that was completely under his control, he discovered that his connection with the world seemed to have been weakened. Although he could still vaguely sense the existence of the world and the feeling of being the ruler of the world, everything had been completely weakened. It felt as if some incredible power was using an indescribable method to cut off all his connections with the outside world, including the connection with the world. Facing such a situation, the heavenly Tao's expression changed. "This is a true perfect world creator?" This thought flashed through his mind as power began to slowly emerge from his body. One must know that although he wasn't a world creator, he was still the heavenly Tao, one that had been acknowledged by Luo Fan as the ruler of the world. How could he be weak? At this moment, when he discovered that the perfect world creator intended to use force, a strong fighting spirit surged in his heart. As long as I can tear this isolation apart for an instant, he won't have a chance to turn the tables anymore. Such a thought flashed through his mind. But the facts showed that he had clearly underestimated the perfect world creator. Or rather, he hadn't only underestimated the perfect world creator, but he had also completely underestimated all the world creators. At this moment, the aura of the perfect world creator didn't decrease. Instead, it rose in a frenzy. In the past, it was already enough to cover the heavens and earth, and it could even affect the connection between the heavenly Tao and the world. But now, after a frenzied increase, its influence was further strengthened. In the beginning, the heavenly Tao was still able to connect him with the heavens and earth. But very soon, he realized that his connection with the heavens and earth had unknowingly weakened. In a daze, he seemed to have been completely separated from the heavens and earth, as if he was all alone. On the other hand, the creator of the world seemed to have become larger and more majestic, like a god of creation that could support the heavens and earth. At this moment, even the world around him that was condensed from the memories of the perfect world creator had changed. They seemed to have turned into a real world, a world that belonged to the perfect world creator. Chapter 28:44. The perfect heaven and earth creator was filled with anger. This kind of anger was enough to destroy the heavens and earth. At this moment, this kind of destruction had already been added to the aura, and it was constantly being released through his own aura, causing this parallel space to shake violently. The perfect heaven and earth creator was very weak in front of Luo Fan and didn't have much of an advantage in front of the heavenly Tao. However, in reality, there was no doubt that he was powerful. After all, he was an existence that could split the world apart. If he truly unleashed his power, destroying the world would be a piece of cake. At this moment, he planned to destroy the world. Faced with such a situation, the heavenly Tao felt as if his entire body was being sliced into pieces and endless pain was drowning him at every moment. "Are you planning to make a move?" The heavenly Tao asked the perfect heaven and earth creator with great difficulty. The perfect heaven and earth creator looked extremely angry at this moment and said, "Shouldn't I make a move?" For the perfect heaven and earth creator, the current situation was already very obvious. This clearly meant that the heavenly Tao was scheming against him. It was using some unknown method to distort his worldview and his will. To any cultivator, this was practically an irreconcilable enmity. It should be known that for cultivators, even the slightest change in their willpower and view of the world would immediately accumulate irreconcilable hatred. But now, the heavenly Tao had used some means to forcefully twist his memories, his ego, into a completely different person. Under such circumstances, the hatred that had accumulated in his heart and the anger he felt towards the heavenly Tao was self-evident. "But do you think that I have the ability to scheme against you?" the heavenly Tao said with great difficulty. At this moment, his body felt like it was being sliced by thousands of knives. There was not a single part of his body that was undamaged. Even thinking or speaking required him to use up all the energy in his body. "I also thought that you didn't have this ability before. But obviously I was wrong." The perfect heaven and earth creator showed extreme anger on his face. This was the anger of being deceived, the anger of being schemed against. At this time, he recalled everything he had experienced in this parallel universe, and an indescribable sense of shame rose from the bottom of his heart. If one were to look at everything that he had done in this parallel universe from a higher perspective, was he a clown or a fool? At the thought of this, his desire to destroy became even stronger. "Die!" the perfect heaven and earth creator roared. With this roar, he finally made his move. In an instant, he suddenly raised his hand and slammed it toward the heavenly Tao. With this slap, an unimaginable power gathered between his hands in an instant. The power gathered into an incomparably condensed and wondrous spiritual light. After it took shape, it instantly shook the parallel space of the entire world. Under this tremor, countless cracks appeared in the parallel universe. These cracks were like the patterns of the parallel universe itself, covering every inch of the void in the parallel universe. Faced with this situation, Tiandao was shocked. However, it was only shock. Although the perfect heaven and earth creator was extremely powerful, this heavenly Tao was obviously not weak. Especially at this moment, under the circumstances of the world of laws, it was even more so. One must know that the heavenly Tao itself had been given the highest authority in this world by Luofan. This highest authority allowed him to borrow all the power of this world of laws to do whatever he wanted. At the very least, everything that was allowed by this world of laws. This parallel universe seemed to be completely different from the main body of the world of laws, but in fact, it was also a part of the world of laws. Here, the heavenly Tao could also borrow all the power of the world of laws, and he could also use this power to fight against the perfect heaven and earth creator. At this moment, in the face of the ferocious attack of the perfect heaven and earth creator, the heavenly Tao only sneered. Then, his figure flashed and he instantly left this parallel universe. At the same time, the entire parallel universe, from the inside to the outside, from top to bottom, was filled with a terrifying power of destruction. Under this terrifying power, the entire parallel universe began to be destroyed from the inside out. This destruction was no longer the effect of the perfect heaven and earth creator's power, but the effect of the heavenly Tao's own power. Or rather, it was the effect of his authority. With the destruction of the parallel universe, the perfect heaven and earth creator felt an unimaginable and terrifying danger strike his heart. It was as if all the foundations of his body were about to be destroyed and wiped out in an instant. This danger was so intense that the perfect heaven and earth creator instantly felt that if he didn't take action, what awaited him might be death. Faced with such a situation, the perfect heaven and earth creator sneered, and then the light condensed from memories around him began to change inexplicably. Countless strange lights condensed from these lights in an instant, giving rise to countless indescribable phenomena that pushed the strange light to spread out rapidly. The area covered by the light continued to expand outward. Very soon, its position had completely replaced all the positions of the entire parallel universe, causing the entire parallel universe to be replaced by this light that was like a world, like a time and space. This parallel universe was just an insignificant dot in the entire world of laws. But this didn't mean that it could be abandoned at will. As mentioned before, the countless parallel universes in the world of laws actually represented the countless possibilities of the world of laws. Under such circumstances, the destruction of this parallel universe also represented the destruction of a certain possibility of the world of laws. This situation was obviously unacceptable to the world of laws. After all, no matter how small it was still damage. For the world of laws, damage represented a trend, and a little damage could be the beginning of its collapse. Therefore, the world of laws absolutely couldn't accept the damage of this parallel universe. However, the destruction of this parallel universe was obviously a fact. It was the heavenly Tao that had used its authority to forcibly destroy the parallel universe. Under such circumstances, the world of laws' unacceptance and the destruction of this parallel universe intertwined, causing the world of laws to start looking for other possibilities to make up for the loss of this parallel universe. For example, the splendor condensed from the memories of the creator of the perfect world that had appeared here at this moment was clearly a good choice. The destruction of the parallel universe was the disappearance of a certain possibility of the world of laws. Under such circumstances, the best way to make up for its loss was, of course, to find that possibility again. In other words, to restore the parallel universe. But it was obvious that this was impossible. In order to destroy the perfect heaven and earth creator at the same time, the heavenly Tao had done its best to destroy the parallel universe. The destruction of the parallel universe had already reached the limit of what it could do. As the heavenly Tao, if the limit of destruction that it thought could be easily restored, then it would be in vain. Therefore, it was obvious that restoring the parallel universe and making up for the loss of the possibility might seem simple, but in fact, it was almost impossible. Since it was impossible to completely restore the parallel universe, the other possible way to restore the possibility of this world was to use another possibility to make up for the loss of the possibility of the world being restored. And obviously, the perfect heaven and earth creator had provided such a brand new possibility at this time. Almost all the content of the memory of the perfect heaven and earth creator came from all his past experiences and everything he had seen and heard in the perfect world. Under such circumstances, even if the world formed by all the light was similar to the world of laws, it was fundamentally a completely different existence from the world of laws. Under such circumstances, this world was a brand new possibility that had never appeared before compared to the world of laws. This possibility was enough to make up for the possibility that the world of laws had lost due to the loss of the parallel universe. However, this possibility was ultimately not the same as the possibility that the world of laws had before. Therefore, even if it was made up for, the possibility of the world of laws would still be somewhat different from the original one. As a result, the entire world of laws fell into an inexplicable turmoil. Or rather, it had fallen into a process of readjusting the balance. At this time, the world formed by the spiritual light of the perfect heaven and earth creator was a change formed under the support of the world of laws. In this change, the perfect heaven and earth creator was unknowingly accepted by the world of laws and gradually obtained a portion of the authority of the world of laws. If Luo Fan was in the world of laws, he naturally wouldn't be able to discover this situation. If Luo Fan was still around, any adjustment of authority in this world would require his consent before it could be completed. If Luo Fan was here, he obviously wouldn't hand over the authority of the world of laws to someone he didn't understand. For example, the perfect heaven and earth creator, however, it was obvious that Luo Fan was no longer in the world of laws. Everything in the world of laws operated automatically under the countless concepts of the world of laws. Secondly, it was under the incomplete initial control of the heavenly Tao. At this time, this change had clearly exceeded the scope of the heavenly Tao's control. In other words, the heavenly Tao had already taken the initiative to give up control over the changes in the world of laws. Therefore, the final decision on whether the perfect heaven and earth creator could obtain the authority of the world of laws had become the countless concepts of the world of laws. The world of laws naturally didn't have its own judgment and intelligence. For the world of laws, as long as it conformed to its own operating rules, as long as it could fit in with its internal concept structure, and there was no contradiction with the concept, then the world of laws would be able to accept it. It didn't matter if the existence was born and bred in the world of laws, nor did it matter how long it had been in the world of laws. Obviously, its own world of laws had been assimilated by the world of laws, and even its body had unknowingly transformed into a human form. Under such circumstances, how could it possibly go against the world of laws? All its concepts, all its actions, and all the world it constructed would naturally conform to the world of laws and naturally be accepted by the world of laws. Therefore, in the end, when the world of laws needed to be replenished, the world template created by the perfect heaven and earth creator was easily accepted. That's right, the brilliance condensed from those memories was the world template in the eyes of the world of laws. As long as there were enough materials to fill in this template, it would naturally be able to transform into space-time, into a world, and into a world. In the end, it would be able to make up for the lost possibilities of the world of laws. As long as it didn't violate all the rules and concepts of the world of laws and could help the world of laws to make up for the lost possibilities, the world of laws would naturally give it the corresponding authority. The final result was like this. Unknowingly, it had already become the authoritative being of the world of laws. Different from Luo Fan and the heavenly Tao, it was the third authoritative being of the world of laws. The identity of the third authoritative being was enough for the perfect heaven and earth creator to obtain the foundation to greatly weaken the heavenly Tao's advantage in the world of laws. At this moment, the expression on the heavenly Tao's face turned extremely unsightly. He originally planned to rely on the power of the world of laws to get rid of the perfect heaven and earth creator, but he didn't expect that his actions would instead give him a chance to make a comeback. It allowed him to unknowingly obtain a foundation that was comparable to his own, making his situation even more severe. In the end, my understanding of the world of laws is still insufficient. Looking at all this, the heavenly Tao couldn't help but feel regret. If he had a deeper understanding of the world of laws and understood that the world of laws would undergo such changes without anyone controlling it, his choice just now would definitely have been different. In that case, this result obviously wouldn't have happened. Chapter 28:45. At this moment, the perfect world creator had already obtained incredible power. With just a slight roar, the many parallel places of the world of laws began to tremble violently. In an instant, Tian Dao had a subtle feeling, as if his control over the world of laws had been stripped away in an instant. The world of laws, which he originally didn't care about and still provided him with almost all support, seemed to have gradually forgotten about him at this moment, and the support it provided to him became weaker and weaker. Amidst this change, the many actions he had taken to get rid of the world of laws before were gradually used to settle accounts, and all kinds of inexplicable backlashes began to appear on his body. In a trance, he felt that an important part of his body was gradually being separated. Don't forget, Tiandao itself was not born as a heavenly Tao. In fact, at the beginning, Luo Fan obviously didn't intend to create a heavenly Tao in the world of laws. The appearance of the heavenly Tao of the world of laws was due to various coincidences and circumstances. In the beginning, Luo Fan's goal was only to create a mechanism that completely targeted Otherworld. And this mechanism was the antivirus software and firewall. In the end, due to various reasons, the firewall and antivirus software merged and turned into Tiandao. After that, everything that Tiandao experienced and everything that he was experiencing now happened. But now, the heavenly Tao discovered that two parts of itself were slowly being separated from its body. This feeling was extremely strange. At this moment, he had an inexplicable feeling, as if his two originally unified distracting thoughts were gradually gaining freedom. Gradually, he began to think independently. In fact, there were even all kinds of contradictions between them, and they were actually gradually targeting each other. The appearance of this situation made Tiandao instantly panic. At this moment, he was even more terrified than when he was directly facing the shocking wrath of the perfect world creator. When facing the wrath of the perfect world creator, the worst outcome for him was death. But at least before he died, he would still be himself and wouldn't become something else. However, the situation he was encountering now was completely different. What he was encountering now was that his heart was splitting apart, and he had unknowingly become no longer himself. It wasn't as if he had lost control of himself and was no longer himself. He had truly become no longer himself. How could the heavenly axiom not feel fear in the face of such a situation? One had to know that losing himself was more unacceptable than death. Death was death. After this, he would no longer know or understand anything. Even if the world was destroyed, the world perished, and his body was trampled upon, it would no longer have anything to do with him. However, if he was no longer himself, then the situation would be completely different. Because if that was the case, the situation had clearly changed. His body, his will, and his everything had betrayed him. Strictly speaking, even he himself had betrayed himself. For most people, betrayal was more difficult to accept than death. Obviously, the heaven's will was one of these people. For the heavenly Tao, being betrayed by oneself was an experience even more difficult to accept than death. Under such circumstances, when faced with this moment where his will suddenly split into two and began to think independently, it was easy to imagine how he felt when he considered the outside world from the perspective of an independent entity. At this moment, he had even completely forgotten about the incomparably powerful perfect heaven and earth creator that he was facing. At this moment, he was wholeheartedly focused on his heart, on the predicament he was currently encountering. How should I solve this problem? At this moment, this was the only thought in Heavenly Tao's mind. Being betrayed by his own body and will was something he couldn't accept no matter what. If he had to choose, he would even rather die. Facing such a change, the perfect heaven and earth creator suddenly stopped. For a perfect heaven and earth creator, the heaven and earth creator was still of great value. At the very least, the charm that the heaven and earth creator displayed was different from the world of laws, and the feeling of being incompatible with the world of laws made him, who had fallen into the assimilation of the world of laws, rather curious. After all, he had only comprehended for a short period of time in this world, yet his worldview had already been distorted and assimilated by the world of laws. What about the heaven and earth creator in front of him? As the heaven and earth creator, he was naturally born and raised in this world of laws. How could he have cultivated in this world of laws for hundreds of millions of years? After being immersed in the world of laws for such a long time, it went without saying that the impact he received was huge. He absolutely did not believe that the influence he had received would be any less than the influence he had received. However, an existence like him was actually able to maintain his worldview in the world of laws, allowing him to maintain his worldview throughout the entire process. He was actually able to carry out his worldview to the end in such a place. In the end, the aura of the heaven and earth creator wasn't as strong as the aura of the world of laws he had. This situation was obviously extremely strange to him. At this moment, he was extremely curious about how the heaven and earth creator did it. And if he could do it, could he replicate it? Could he use the means of the heaven and earth creator to restore freedom to his world of laws? To regain the independence of the world of laws that he originally possessed? This kind of expectation wasn't too much. At this time, he could only look to the heaven and earth creator. A perfect world opener was, after all, a perfect world opener. Even if he was in a state of extreme rage, he could still maintain a clear mind. Even in this state where he had lost his rationality, he could still instinctively choose the method that was most beneficial to him. At this time, his attack on the heaven and earth creator had unknowingly begun to weaken. He wanted to see how the heaven and earth creator would respond. However, the way the heaven and earth creator responded this time surprised him. It has completely given up on resisting? What kind of response is this? What's the point of this response? The perfect heaven and earth creator was extremely puzzled at this moment. No matter how he looked at it, the heaven and earth creator's choice at this time could only bring about death. Why did the heaven and earth creator make such a choice at this time? Was there a mystery to this choice that he wasn't aware of? Or could it be that the heaven and earth creator was certain that he couldn't do anything to it, so he didn't even bother to defend? Thinking of this last possibility, the perfect heaven and earth creator's heart surged with anger. After all, he was still overwhelmed by anger at this time. As a mind that was overwhelmed by anger, how could he not show the slightest inclination of anger? Although he could try his best to turn his mind to his own actions in this rage, and make these actions lead to results that were beneficial to him, but in the end, compared to usual, his emotions were still too easily stirred up. At this moment, facing such a change, the perfect heaven and earth creator began to take actions that he didn't want to take before under the control of anger. Since you're so confident, let me see what makes you so confident. At this moment, such a thought flashed through his mind. With this thought in mind, the aura on his body skyrocketed again, and an incredible and terrifying pressure surged towards the heaven and earth creator again. It was just that this terrifying pressure was no longer limited to the simple aura from before. Compared to before, this aura was mixed with a unique impact on the worldview. It was the strongest impact on a relatively complete worldview formed after the perfect world creator was assimilated by Luo Fan's worldview of laws. Under this impact, the heaven and earth creator felt as if he was being crushed by an endless and terrifying world out of nowhere. This crushing pressure was so absolute, so intense. Under this crushing pressure, Tiandao could feel that the authority he possessed that belonged to the world of laws was fading away even faster. As this kind of authority faded, the backlash that was originally suppressed because of the existence of authority began to surface even faster. Among them, the most obvious kind of backlash was the one that the heaven and earth creator was suffering at this moment, the backlash of the world's will. To the heaven and earth creator, his will was absolute, sacred, and inviolable. It was an existence that he would rather die than allow to be shaken in the slightest. However, that was only the case for the heaven and earth creator. For the components of the heaven and earth creator, the situation was completely opposite. The heaven and earth creator was built by Luo Fan by combining firewalls and antivirus software. Antivirus software and firewalls also had their own will. Even at the beginning, this will wasn't too obvious, and it even made people wonder if it was real. However, a will was a will. Even if it didn't look like it, it was still a will. As a will, maintaining one's integrity and independence was obviously an instinct. In this way, It was self-evident what the heaven and earth creator represented to the firewall and antivirus software. To them, the existence of the heaven and earth creator was already their enemy. Because of the existence of the heaven and earth creator, they couldn't obtain true freedom and couldn't think freely. Under such circumstances, the will of the heaven and earth creator was obviously the target that they needed to defeat and destroy. To the heaven and earth creator, the death of the antivirus software and firewall wasn't a pity. To the heaven and earth creator, the heaven and earth creator would also be happy to get rid of them. Such an absolute position made it so that once a battle broke out between the two camps, it would definitely be a battle to the death. At this moment, the situation was that such a battle was breaking out between the two camps. The heaven and earth creator was trying its best to suppress the will of the firewall and antivirus software that had been reborn. Meanwhile, the two wills were trying their best to separate their own parts from the overall will of the heaven and earth creator, trying their best to assimilate more of the will into their own. The battle was so intense that it even produced waves of indescribable waves that began to be released from Tiandao's body, gushing out in all directions. At a certain moment, a figure suddenly separated from the body of the heaven and earth creator. It was the figure of a man. Soon after, another figure separated from the body. This time, it was the figure of a woman. As the two figures separated from the body of the heaven and earth creator, the body of the heaven and earth creator became very blurry and illusory. It was like a strange existence that had walked out of an illusion. "I am not an illusion," the heaven and earth creator roared angrily. There seemed to be an indescribable existence that appeared out of thin air within his body. It started to quickly fill in the gaps left by the disappearance of the two figures, causing the body of the heaven and earth creator to turn solid once again. It was trying its best to transform into the complete body of the heaven and earth creator. Although the foundation of the heaven and earth creator was formed by the antivirus software and firewall, this method of formation did not mean that he would forever be controlled by them. It was just like a person that was born from his parent. He was formed from the combination of a father and a part of a mother. However, this did not mean that he only represented a part of his parents and mother. After he was born, he was already a real person, a person who knew how to think and possess wisdom. It was obviously extremely ridiculous for such a person to want to equate the other parts of his parents and mother. At this moment, the heaven and earth creator was that person. The father and mother were equivalent to the antivirus software and firewall. The heaven and earth creator was indeed formed by the combination of the antivirus software and firewall. However, in fact, after the entire body of wisdom was born, it had been constantly growing on its own. This kind of growth of the will completely belonged to the heaven and earth creator. Even the creator of the heaven and earth creator, the antivirus software and firewall, could not share in this growth and could not completely take credit for this growth. Chapter 2846. At this moment, the creator looked at the three figures that had appeared in front of him with an indescribable expression. Among them, the most familiar one was naturally the body of the heavenly Tao. However, compared to before, the body seemed slightly illusory, as if it was moving from an illusory level to reality with great difficulty. The remaining two silhouettes were rather strange. They looked somewhat familiar, but they were mostly unfamiliar. Furthermore, even their genders were different from before. It's actually made up of different individuals. What a wonderful structure! At this moment, even though the creator was furious, he could not help but exclaim in admiration. This admiration was naturally not directed at the heavenly Tao before him, but at the creator of the heavenly Tao. In other words, behind the heavenly Tao, or rather, behind the heavenly Tao was the incomparably powerful creator of laws. The method of fusing two existences into the heavenly Tao did not seem like much at first glance. However, if one thought about it carefully, This method could obviously avoid a lot of trouble and eliminate many hidden dangers that originally existed. For example, under normal circumstances, the existence of a heavenly Tao was extremely likely to threaten the great Tao of this world. This was almost unavoidable. After all, the responsibilities of the heavenly Tao and the great Tao were too similar. For the great Tao, it was the source of everything in the world, the source of laws, and the source of time and space. Everything in the world originated from it and operated according to the various mysteries and principles within it. On the other hand, the heavenly Tao controlled everything in the universe apart from the great Tao. It could be said that apart from not becoming the source of everything, its responsibilities were no different from the great Tao. As the great Tao was the source of all things, it was above the heavenly Tao. If the heavenly Tao was just a collection of ordinary laws that only knew how to operate according to the laws and only knew how to act according to the initial settings, there would naturally be nothing to say and there would be no hidden dangers. However, the heavenly Tao had the responsibilities of the great Tao, but it also had the will of a living being. As an existence that had the will of a living being, its pursuit of treatment that was suitable for its abilities was clearly deeply rooted in its instincts. Under such circumstances, the heavenly Tao would almost definitely challenge the great Tao. Once this challenge was successful, the heavenly Tao would naturally replace the great Tao. In the end, it might still be assimilated by the great Tao and become a new great Tao. It would become an existence similar to the previous great Tao, but it would also lose its previous self as the heavenly Tao. However, before one's self completely disappeared and truly transformed into a new great Tao, the will of the heavenly Tao would definitely contaminate the great Tao. This kind of pollution might be insignificant to the great Tao, but it definitely existed, and it was enough to truly change the great Tao. Such a change was even sufficient to affect the composition of the world and cause the basic logic of the composition of the world to undergo a subtle change. And obviously, the basic logic of the composition of heaven and earth was actually the worldview that heaven and earth followed. Speaking up to this point, it was obvious how great the impact would be. For a part of the world, this could be said to be the greatest impact. To any creator of the universe, this was clearly a change that they could not accept. For the pioneers of the world, one's own worldview was the key. Once one became passive, it would lead to an irreconcilable hatred. Under such circumstances, the existence of the heavenly Tao was obviously a hidden danger. At this moment, the actions of the creator of the world, Luo Fan, was obviously a wonderful solution to this hidden danger. The heavenly Tao itself possessed a will that was close to the will of living beings. Such a will and freedom were also its greatest pursuit. For such a will, every part of its body was an incomparably precious part of itself. Once he lost it, he would no longer be complete. Therefore, the attitude of the entire heavenly Tao towards the two wills that it formed was obvious. For the two wills that it formed, its independence was also extremely precious, and no existence could shake it. Under such circumstances, it was self-evident what attitude they should have towards the heavenly Tao as a whole. It could be said that the whole and its parts were naturally in a state of constant struggle. Such a struggle would not have any effect under normal circumstances. At most, it would just cause the heavenly Tao to have a little more distracting thoughts. However, once it reached a critical moment, such as when the heavenly Tao intended to replace the great Tao, such a struggle would instantly become fatal to the heavenly Tao. This was because if the heavenly Tao wanted to replace the great Tao, it naturally needed to align its will with the great Tao. Once one's will was aligned with the great Tao, then one's tolerance would increase greatly. In other words, the two parts of its will would instantly obtain a huge space for growth, or in other words, space to move about. Once there was such space, the two parts of its will would naturally grow tremendously. Such growth would eventually become a towering tree that would greatly increase their overall resistance against the heavenly Tao. In the end, there was a high possibility that the heavenly Tao would be completely torn apart. Once such an outcome occurred, not only would the heavenly Tao be unable to advance any further, but its own existence might also be greatly threatened. As the creator of the world gasped in admiration and thought about the magical effects of doing so, he gradually recovered from his furious state. After he recovered, he could not help but sigh. He knew that he could no longer go back. In other words, even if he could go back, he was in no position to do so. The process of self-change was so cruel. Once it changed, it would be a complete change, a complete change. Even if he discovered that he had changed, he would no longer be able to return to his previous self, or rather, he would no longer be willing to return to his previous self. The reason was actually very simple. After the change, he was already a brand new self. Since he was already a brand new self, wouldn't restoring his original self be equivalent to erasing this brand new self? Who was the one who had to decide whether or not to restore himself? The one who made this decision was obviously the new self. In other words, this required the new self to have a fearless spirit of self-sacrifice in order to make such a decision. Obviously, not many new selves would have such a spirit of sacrifice. If they had such a spirit of sacrifice, the changed self would obviously be more outstanding than the old self, and the sacrifice would naturally be meaningless. Therefore, once the self was changed, this change was already a complete and irreversible change. For such a change, even if the changed self seemed to have lost its original potential and a stronger future. However, this was also his own self. Having no future was still better than having a completely lost self. At the very least, this was the case for most living beings. It was the same for this perfect world creator. At this time, his worldview had already been completely assimilated by Luo Fan's worldview. Compared to his original worldview, this worldview was already extremely bad, and his self was no longer the same because of such a change in worldview. However, he was already a new self. Not to mention whether he could do it or not, even if he twisted his view of the world and his sense of self back, his new self would be as good as dead. This kind of fearless self-sacrifice was something that a new perfect world creator could not do. From a certain point of view, this new perfect world creator might have to thank the heavenly Tao for scheming against him. If it wasn't for the heavenly Tao scheming against him, how could he really be born? However, it was obvious that this was the case in theory, but it was not the case from an emotional point of view. Everything he had was inherited from his old self. Everything he had, whether it was his memories or anything else, was completely inherited from his old self. Under such circumstances, although he knew rationally that his birth was due to the schemes of the heavenly axiom, as the creator of a new perfect world who had inherited all of his previous memories, the heavenly axiom was actually scheming against him, even if this was his previous self. The feelings were ultimately of the same origin and could not be severed no matter what. Under such circumstances, he wanted him to thank the heavenly Tao? That was simply a fool's dream. The heavenly Tao clearly had no time or energy to pay attention to all the actions of the perfect world creator. At this time, he was only focused on his own foundation, on whether he could regain his true self and regain everything he had. Apart from this, he no longer cared about anything else, including his own life and death. In this way, it went without saying what he thought about all the actions of the perfect world creator. "I am real," he muttered as he struggled to condense himself bit by bit from nothingness. His memories, his wisdom, and his brilliance were constantly emerging from the bottom of his heart. Every moment, he was struggling to extract a little bit of his true self, bit by bit, from within. For life, how did one determine the existence of one's self? How could one be sure that one was himself and not something else? There were all sorts of explanations in various philosophies. For cultivators, this kind of self was mixed in their own memories, their own wisdom, and the various inspirations that appeared in their hearts at every moment. All of this contained all aspects of one's self and encompassed everything about one's self. As long as one collected all of the self contained in all of this and combined them together, the final form would be one's self, of course. This was under the condition that there was enough of it. If there wasn't enough of it, then the self obtained would only be a small part of one's self. Under such changes, it was impossible to say how much meaning one's self would have. Fortunately, the heavenly Tao had a huge advantage compared to other living beings. In the past, and even now, it had sent out countless heavenly Tao clones to many other worlds to help them resist the great calamities of the world. In the process, he had gathered tens of thousands of times more wisdom, experience, and even memories than ordinary living beings. With such changes, it went without saying how much of one's self he could extract. With such a foundation, it was easy to imagine how much of one's self he could obtain. Under such circumstances, he would naturally have a great chance of condensing his true self, a complete self. However, this was clearly a rather difficult task. After all, the heavenly Tao clones were not the true bodies of the heavenly Tao. There was no doubt that the memories, inspiration, wisdom, and experiences accumulated in the heavenly Tao clones could extract one's self. However, the concentration of one's self that was extracted in such a way was rather average. It required a considerable amount of condensation before it could truly be used on the new self. As a result, he wanted to use the numerous memories, wisdom, inspiration, and experiences to condense his new self. However, the speed was many times slower than other living beings. At this moment, the heavenly Tao had actually given up on himself. He naturally knew that he was actually facing an unbelievable crisis at this moment. The perfect heaven and earth creator outside could crush his body with a terrifying might at any time and completely destroy everything about him. It was only because of his obsession with himself and his obsession with the truth that he didn't care about all of this at this moment. He completely ignored all of this and only focused on himself, on his own truth. At this moment, he continued, and time grew longer and longer. He felt as if thousands of years had passed, but the feeling of death still did not arrive. It felt as if he was starting his own cultivation in an incomparably safe place. This situation made him extremely surprised, but he did not have the mood to care about the perfect heaven and earth creator. He did not think about why the perfect heaven and earth creator did not take any action, or rather, why he was not dead yet. Compared to this, he placed more importance on his own self. Even if he had a little more self, he felt that it was more meaningful than thinking about these things. Chapter 28:47. The heavenly Tao was working hard for its own self, and the perfect world was also doing the same thing, working hard for its own self. Although they were different individuals, the final development between them was actually so similar in the same battle, as if they were different paths leading to the same goal. To the heaven's will, his current efforts were using all the inspiration, experiences, emotions, memories, and everything else he had obtained after becoming the heaven's will to continuously refine and fuse the strands of his scattered self, turning them into the foundation of his true self. As for the creator of the perfect world, he was now working hard for his own existence. He was doing his best to preserve his distorted self as much as possible, and the best way to maintain his distorted self was, of course, to work hard to understand the source of the distortion. In other words, at this moment, the world that he was in was filled with the mysteries of the world of laws. And at this time, the attitude of the world of laws towards him was obviously giving him great convenience. One must know that the current him had almost replaced the heavenly Tao and become a person with extremely high authority in this world of laws. With such authority, he had obviously been completely accepted by the world of laws. After this acceptance, the various hidden things in the world of laws were naturally gradually opened to him. Although it was impossible for him to directly receive the world of laws contained in the world of laws, At least it was many times more convenient than the original situation where he had to rely on the changes in the surrounding environment to comprehend the world of laws. At this time, the perfect world creator was observing the situation of the heavenly Tao while expending a great deal of effort to extract the mysteries of the world of laws from the world of laws, trying hard to extract the mysteries of the world of laws contained within. This appearance seemed leisurely on the surface, but in fact, the urgency inside was not inferior to the heavenly Tao at all. For the heavenly Tao, if it relaxed even a little, what awaited it would probably be the complete destruction of its entire body and mind, and everything would disappear completely. Under such circumstances, it was almost a race against time with the Grim Reaper, so how could it not be anxious? In that case, it was easy to understand the urgency of the creator of the perfect world. The perfect world creator had always been extremely domineering, and when facing the heavenly Tao, it was as if he was a powerhouse that had descended from another supreme plane. However, in reality, there was no need to talk about whether the perfect world creator really existed on a higher plane. The person who had appeared before the heavenly Tao in the parallel spacetime that had been replaced by the memories evolved from the spirit light of memories was the perfect creator of the world. He was nothing more than an avatar of the true creator of the world. Although this incarnation possessed most of the main body's strength and almost all of the main body's memories. However, no matter what, an incarnation was just an incarnation. Since it was an incarnation, its life and death were naturally in the hands of the main body. As long as the main body willed it, with a single thought, this incarnation would die without a burial ground. Perhaps even all traces of its existence would disappear without a trace. This situation was naturally nothing to the original incarnation of the creator of the world, who did not have a new self. After all, no matter what, his will was the will of the main body. The decision made by the main body was no different from his own decision. Under such circumstances, his disappearance was as if he had gotten rid of some distracting thoughts in an instant. Under such circumstances, the incarnation of the creator of the perfect world naturally could not resist. However, when this incarnation obtained a new self, and his world-view was distorted and assimilated by the world-view of the world, the situation was obviously completely different. For the current him, if the main body made the decision to kill him, it would be equivalent to his past transmigrating to kill his current self. This kind of situation was obviously unacceptable to any existence. Even ordinary people would definitely put up the strongest resistance in such a situation and do everything possible to avoid being obliterated. Even the self that had transmigrated from the past was also a self, and it was the same. Similarly, the situation was the same for the perfect creator of the world. However, compared to the situation where an ordinary person's past transmigrated to kill his current self, the current situation of the perfect creator of the world was even worse. This was because if his past self wanted to kill his current self, he would have to fight his current self like he was fighting an enemy. Only by defeating his current self would he be able to kill his current self. According to the development trend of cultivators, generally speaking, his current self would be stronger than his past self. Therefore, if his past self transmigrated to kill his current self, the chances of success were actually quite low unless it was an accident. However, the situation of the perfect creator of the world was completely different. For the perfect creator of the world, what might want to kill him now was the main body that could remove his incarnation with a single thought, completely destroy his foundation of existence, and completely annihilate his body and mind. The danger he had to take against such a main body was tens of thousands of times greater than fighting against his past self. It could be said that his current self could almost be said to be dead in the light. In other words, as long as his main body discovered the changes that were happening to his body, then his body and mind would definitely collapse in the next instant, and there would be no chance of survival. At that time, let alone his self, Even the memories of all living beings would probably be completely erased. Under such circumstances, it went without saying how urgent the perfect creator of the world was. In order to avoid such an outcome, the only choice was obviously to start from the world of laws that he was in at this moment. Only by using the world of laws to change his essence as much as possible and change the fact that everything about him was controlled by the main body of the perfect creator of the world could he save his life and allow his main body to truly survive. It went without saying how difficult it was to achieve this goal. At the very least, with the understanding of the world of laws and the understanding of the world of laws, the perfect creator of the world of laws still had no idea how to achieve such an effect. Now, he could only try his best to dig into the depths of the world of laws and try his best to absorb nutrients from it, and finally find a way to change this awkward situation. In fact, if it were not for this thought, although he would be curious about the changes that were happening to the heavenly Tao and wanted to explore the various changes that were happening to the heavenly Tao. However, he would never have the patience to wait quietly for the heavenly Tao to gradually materialize itself from nothingness. After all, although his predicament and the heavenly Tao's seemed very different, from another perspective, their encounters were actually quite similar. For the heavenly Tao, his current situation was that he wanted to get rid of the fact that he was self-supported by firewalls and antivirus software. He needed to truly materialize his original illusory self. For the perfect creator of the world of laws, he also needed to get rid of the foundation of his existence and let his self truly materialize so that he could completely get rid of the danger of death in the process. From this point of view, their situations were quite similar. As the new authority holder of the world of laws, the perfect creator of the world of laws gradually came into contact with the secrets of the world of laws. Soon, more and more parallel worlds entered his senses. There are actually so many parallel worlds. What kind of existence created such a world? Sensing the existence of countless parallel worlds, the perfect creator of the world of laws couldn't help but be shocked. After all, the situation of the world of laws in front of him had completely subverted his worldview, making him feel even more shocked by the vastness and perfection of the world of laws. At this moment, he wasn't just rejoicing that he had been distorted and assimilated by the world of laws because of the birth of a new self. Instead, he was inexplicably rejoicing because of the power of the world of laws. Perhaps it wasn't a bad thing to be assimilated by such a world of laws? Perhaps his potential hadn't been lost. On the contrary, it seemed to have been greatly expanded. If his main body knew about this feeling, he would understand that it was a manifestation of his own world of laws being distorted and assimilated more intensely by the world of laws. However, for this incarnation who had a new self, it was clearly his own insight. Based on the situation of the incarnation itself, this was actually not wrong. After all, the world of laws that the incarnation possessed came from the main body. If this world of laws didn't change and the incarnation completely inherited all the memories, emotions, and senses of the main body, then this world of laws would naturally be no different from his own. However, once this incarnation obtained its own self and turned from an accessory of the main body into an independent individual, even if it wasn't a brand new individual, this situation would undergo an earth-shattering change. At this point, the world of laws that seemed to have been created by his main body was obviously no longer compatible with him. At this point, the existence of this world of laws was obviously similar to the essence of the world of laws. From this point of view, the original him could actually be regarded as a state that was distorted and assimilated by his main body's world of laws. Under such circumstances, being assimilated by the world of laws was no different from his original self. Since there was no difference in essence, being assimilated by a stronger world of laws and a more perfect world of laws was obviously more promising and potential than being assimilated by a weaker world of laws. Although perhaps for existences that had a unique world of laws and had never been assimilated by the world of laws, their potential would be weaker. In comparison, it was already much stronger than before. Moreover, this situation wasn't unchangeable. Just like the heavenly Tao, it turned out that his world of laws was also given by Luo Fan, and it couldn't even be regarded as his own world of laws. But now, wasn't he also working hard to sort out his own world of laws and get rid of the limitations of the world of laws? Of course, this didn't mean that being assimilated by the world of laws wouldn't have an impact on the creators of Perfect World. In fact, being assimilated by the world of laws was equivalent to erasing the past self, and from the remains of this erased self, a new self was born. Next, how this new self chose, even if it reorganized its own world of laws and got rid of the limitations of the world of laws, that was only the achievement of this new self. For the original self, all of this was obviously meaningless. In other words, even if this new self reorganized the original self's world of laws and strengthened this world of laws, the new self would no longer be the original self. At most, it would be an existence that looked exactly the same as the original self in all aspects. Of course, generally speaking, this kind of situation was actually impossible. Since the original world of laws had been distorted and assimilated by the world of laws, this proved that this kind of world of laws was far from comparable to the world of laws. Under such circumstances, it was obviously an almost impossible task to get rid of the assimilation and distortion of the world of laws by reorganizing and strengthening this world of laws. Perhaps it wasn't absolutely impossible. Perhaps there were some special existences that could erase their own memories through some means, and then use incomparably complicated techniques to recomprehend and reorganize the world of laws that was no different from the previous world of laws. This was the only way that there was a slim chance that the original world of laws could be reproduced. Of course, this kind of behavior was generally unlikely to succeed. In the end, the world of laws that were reorganized in this way was still specious. Perhaps it looked very similar to the original world of laws in general, but specifically, the details of this world of laws were still quite different from the original. Chapter 28:48. At this moment, what the creator of the perfect world wanted was complete independence. There was only one thing that he could rely on, and that was the world of laws, as well as the world of laws contained within the world of laws, which seemed to be more powerful, more complete, more promising, and more potential than the world of laws that he originally possessed. At this moment, the creator of the perfect world of laws still hadn't discovered what had happened to his clone. For his main body, there were too many things that he needed to do. He needed to help his own world give birth to life again, restore vitality to his world that was almost in ruins, make his own world and the surrounding paths, and form an indescribable balance with the surrounding paths, and so on and so forth. All of these things were extremely important to him. Under such circumstances, he naturally couldn't pay attention to the situation of his clone at all times. Of course, there was a very important reason for this, and that was that at this moment, his clone had only entered the world of laws for a few dozen breaths of time at most. Not paying attention to his clone for a few dozen breaths of time was extremely normal for an extremely busy creator of the perfect world of laws. Of course, this was only temporary. After all, his clone was still his clone. No matter how big of a heart he had, it was impossible for him to completely cast his clone aside. In the end, he would still take some time to pay attention to his clone and receive everything that his clone had experienced. If the main body wanted to do that, everything about the main body would no longer be a secret to the main body. At this point, his death would obviously come at any time. Facing such a situation, it was imaginable how anxious the clone of the perfect world of laws would be. Fortunately, the location of this clone was in the parallel universe of the perfect world of laws. The time there was completely unrelated to the main body of the world of laws, as well as the transportation network outside of the main body of the world of laws. This gave the clone enough time to make arrangements to prevent himself from suffering. At this moment, this parallel universe had completely fallen into the control of the clone of the perfect world of laws, and the time there was naturally more at his disposal. Under his adjustments, the flow of time in this parallel universe had unknowingly accelerated to the limit that he could control. In other words, hundreds of millions of years were equivalent to an instant in the outside world. It could be said that this little adjustment was enough to give the incarnation of the creator of the perfect world countless years. During the previous 10 breaths, the main body of the perfect world creator did not pay any attention to this incarnation. From this, it could be seen that the great perfection world creator was rather confident in his clone. This also meant that in the next few breaths, a dozen breaths or even dozens of breaths, it was very unlikely that the perfect world creator would pay attention to this clone again. Of course, this did not mean that he had unlimited time. In fact, as time passed, the possibility of the main body paying attention to the incarnation increased. In other words, as time continued to pass, the possibility of him being erased by the main body was constantly increasing. Under such circumstances, even if he could accelerate time to such an extent that billions of years were equivalent to an instant in the outside world, he still had to race against time to perfect his view of the world, work hard to perfect himself, and work hard to cut off the connection between himself and his main body. There were actually many ways to sever the connection between an avatar and the main body. Among them, the most convenient one was for the main body to give up on this avatar. As long as the main body was willing to give up on this avatar, the avatar would not need to do anything and would only need to wait for itself to obtain independence. Evidently, at this moment, this situation was impossible for the perfect world creator and above. Without knowing what the clone of the perfect world creator would do and what consequences it would cause, how big of a heart did he have to be to directly give up on this avatar? In comparison, any other method would be far inferior to this method. In other words, it would be much more troublesome and difficult. For example, completely isolating himself from the main body so that he could cut off all connections with the main body at all times. As long as he could do this, he would naturally be unable to do anything to the main body and eventually obtain independence. Compared to the previous method, this method was clearly more troublesome. Moreover, it required perseverance and effort, which would consume his power at every moment. Moreover, after doing this, he would lose his freedom completely. This was not a choice that an ordinary person would make. At the very least, it was not a choice that a perfect world creator could make. In fact, most of the other methods had problems of one sort or another. Or rather, they had side effects that the incarnation of the creator of the perfect world could not accept. For the clone of the perfect world creator, the only method he could accept to sever the connection between himself and the main body was none other than the last and most difficult method, which was to separate himself from the main body as much as possible. His essence would no longer be an avatar, and his essence would no longer have any relationship with the main body of the perfect world creator. As long as he could do this, his avatar would naturally become an independent individual and would no longer have any relationship with the main body of the perfect world creator. At this stage, if the main body of the perfect world creator wanted to attack this avatar, it would be like attacking another independent existence. In this way, the biggest problem that he had encountered would naturally be solved. It went without saying how difficult it was to achieve this. If it were not for the fact that it was extremely difficult, no avatar, projection, or avatar would choose other methods that had all sorts of side effects. After all, who didn't want to be truly independent? Who didn't want to be truly alive? In order to achieve all these, the first prerequisite was to have a unique worldview that was completely unrelated to the main body. With such a worldview, everything else could be continued. The worldview could almost be said to be the foundation of a living being, even if it was a living being that had not truly stepped onto the path of cultivation. If one did not have a perfect worldview, one would be ignorant and would have limited prospects. Just from this point alone, one could see how important one's worldview was. Moreover, the worldview was the source of a cultivator's Tao heart, power, faith, and will. Without these, the creature would be nothing more than a walking corpse at most. Under such circumstances, if an avatar wanted to obtain independence and become a real living being, the first thing it had to do was to form its own worldview, which was independent and had nothing to do with the main body. The avatar of the perfect world creator had obviously unintentionally solved this problem. That was because his worldview had already been completely assimilated by the world of laws. Under such assimilation, his worldview had now become a secondary worldview of the world of laws. In other words, it seemed completely different from the world of laws, but if one thought about it carefully, one would find that every concept was faintly in line with a certain concept of the world of laws. Such a worldview was naturally completely different from the worldview of the perfect world creator. Even if such a worldview was still affected by the world of laws and distorted by the world of laws, it could not be considered a worldview that truly belonged to him. By relying on such a worldview, the creator of a perfect world was still not truly free. It was still not truly independent. However, with such a worldview, at least in a certain aspect, he had already broken free from the control of the main body. At this time, if the main body paid attention, he would still be able to discover his existence and everything that he had experienced. However, he was no longer able to control the thoughts in his heart. Under such circumstances, the only way for the perfect world creator's main body to destroy him was to directly deal with him like how he dealt with other individuals and powerhouses. Such a change in time was already a shocking improvement for the embodiment of the creator of the world. At the very least, at this time, the avatar of the perfect world creator was already quite satisfied with this. Next was the second step. The first step was to form a unique worldview that was completely different from the original body. Next, if he wanted to obtain independence and truly become a complete individual, he would no longer be shackled by the perfect world creator's main body and no longer be destroyed by a single thought of the other party. The second step that he needed to do was to directly change his own essence. During this process, his essence could be transformed by the worldview and gradually transform from the original essence that he inherited from the original body to a state that was completely in line with the world of laws. In other words, it was the state of his worldview at this moment. In this situation, it could also be said that he was using the brand new self that he had now produced to assimilate his own essence. As long as he could complete this step, he would be able to sever the connection between himself and his main body. He would be able to gain complete freedom and become a true individual, and that would basically be the end of it. Achieving this was actually the most difficult thing for the perfect world creator. That was because his original worldview that belonged to a perfected pioneer of the world was too stubborn, and it was too closely integrated with his own essence. This kind of tight union, this kind of stubborn state, made it incomparably difficult to change. At the very least, with the ability of this avatar at this moment, it would take an infinite amount of time to change. Under such circumstances, even if this avatar had the ability to distort the flow of time in this parallel universe to the extreme, making an instant in the outside world equivalent to billions of years here, he had no confidence that he would be able to completely change his essence before the main body discovered his situation and make himself basically unaffected by the other party's control. Moreover, even if he completed this step, it would only mean that he had taken the initial step of becoming an independent individual. In fact, this was only the basics. Compared to true independence and a complete individual, he still had a subtle connection with the main body and was still not truly perfect. After all, no matter what, the main body was still the main body. This projection, this avatar, everything was created by the main body. The main body's familiarity with it was even stronger than the avatar's familiarity with the main body. Perhaps the change in essence could indeed cut off the absolute control between the main body and the avatar. However, the loss of absolute control didn't mean that there was no control at all. Absolute control could be carried out through essence, but what about other existences that weren't essence? Through this, the main body could also carry out initial control of the avatar. Although this kind of control was only at the initial stage, in fact, if this kind of control was used well, it was enough to be fatal. For example, if the main body continuously injected all kinds of inexplicable ideas into the avatar through various subtle methods, causing the thoughts of the avatar, or projection to gradually be affected. In the end, at a certain moment, it would directly enter the state and position that the main body wanted it to enter. In that case, for the main body, it was simply equivalent to directly sending himself to the edge of a knife. Once this happened, was there a need to say what the outcome would be for the avatar? Therefore, after completing the second step, there was still a third step for the avatar, which was to completely cut off all the connections between itself and the main body. Under such circumstances and facing such changes, there was only one thing for the avatar to rely on in order to achieve this goal: the world of laws and the world of laws. Only with the help of such an existence would he have the opportunity to achieve this. Chapter 2850. Unknowingly, hundreds of millions of years had passed in this parallel universe. On this day, an indescribable change suddenly occurred in the parallel universe that was like a replica of the world of laws. It was as if some invisible existence began to seep out from all over the world and quickly converge in a certain place. In the end, a faintly discernible figure began to gradually appear in the void. This figure seemed to have the appearance of a born Taoist aptitude. Looking at its appearance, it actually vaguely resembled Luo Fan. Of course, it was even more similar to the incarnation of the perfect world creator from hundreds of millions of years ago. Obviously, this was the incarnation of the perfect world creator. Judging from his current appearance, it was obvious that over the past hundreds of millions of years, he had absorbed the mysteries of the world of laws contained in the world of laws contained in this parallel universe, and had unknowingly transformed his own essence into a world of laws that was in line with the world of laws. In other words, he had been completely assimilated by the world of laws in this world of laws. At this moment, it was actually the moment when he transformed the last bit of his essence. The result of this change was that at this time, there was no longer any detail on his body that did not conform to the structure of a born Taoist aptitude in human form. I've finally severed the initial connection. At this moment, the incarnation of the perfect world creator revealed a faint smile. At this moment, he felt that he had taken the initial step of getting rid of some kind of shackles that were difficult to sever. At the very least, no one would be able to easily get rid of him with just a thought from now on. After carefully observing his own state, the perfect world creator instantly gave an order to the parallel universe of the world of laws. That was to completely imprison himself in this space-time before everything about him was successfully transformed. In other words, unless he destroyed this space-time, it would be impossible for him to leave this space-time unless everything about him changed completely, which was to complete the third step of getting rid of his main body. The reason for this was naturally not because he had any special hobbies, but because this was the only way he could preserve his life as much as possible. After all, although his essence had been completely assimilated with the world of laws, it could be considered that he had severed the initial connection with his main body. However, this was only the essence. Everything else was still under the control of the main body. Perhaps because of the change in his nature, his main body could not erase him with a single thought like before, but he could still influence this incarnation through various other things that were still connected to his main body. For example, his main body could use a similar method to lure him away from the realm of laws, making him feel that it would be safer to leave this place, and then directly fall into the trap of his main body. There were many other similar methods. In fact, even if he had always been in this world of laws, the main body still had many ways to deal with him. In other words, he was not necessarily safe here, but relatively speaking, it would be much more troublesome for his main body to deal with him if he remained in this parallel universe. In other words, although staying in this spacetime might not necessarily be safe, it was at least safer than casually leaving this spacetime, left with no other choice. The incarnation of the creator of the perfect world could only use staying in this spacetime as a last resort. This parallel universe had already been accepted by the realm of laws. Moreover, because of the changes over the past few days, although it could not be said that it had become an indispensable part of the realm of laws and was wholeheartedly protecting it, the realm of laws still paid considerable attention to this parallel universe. Under such attention, it was obviously impossible to destroy this parallel universe with ordinary means. With the strength of the incarnation of the creator of the perfect world, it would be impossible to destroy this parallel universe unless he attacked with all his might. Therefore, letting this parallel universe restrain him was equivalent to letting an existence equivalent to him imprison him. Although this kind of suppression was not absolute, it was clearly the limit that the incarnation of the creator of the perfect world could achieve. Unfortunately, my authority is not enough. After a long time, the incarnation of the creator of the perfect world sighed. If he had enough authority, he would not only be able to control this parallel universe, but could directly use the power of the entire realm of laws to protect himself. If he could really do this, no matter how strong his main body was, it would definitely not be able to pose a threat to him. Sighing, he carefully experienced the parallel universe that he controlled. This spacetime was a complete replica of the realm of laws, and everything in it was in line with the realm of laws. Here, countless living beings were born, as well as all kinds of things that originally only existed in the realm of laws. Among the countless living beings, there was a special living being that was fixed in a certain parallel universe like a statue. It was like the axis of the parallel universe, and also like the core of it. That existence seemed illusory and real at the same time. Occasionally, it seemed to be an absolute existence that was more real than the entire parallel universe. In the next instant, it became illusory again, as if it had completely disappeared between the countless spacetimes. That existence was obviously the heavenly Tao. Or rather, it was the original heavenly Tao. After such a long time, he still had not completed his goal. He had not truly gotten rid of his source and completely achieved his true self. Looking at the current state of the original heavenly Tao, the incarnation of the creator of the perfect world sighed inwardly. Although it's unimaginably slow, once he succeeds, the results will be unimaginably brilliant. Although Yuan Tiandao was currently in a sorry state, his future was extremely promising. One must know that for him, even if he succeeded in taking 3 steps, he would only be able to get rid of the shackles of his main body and become an independent self. After that, he would still be restricted by the realm of laws, and everything about him would still be distorted and assimilated by the realm of laws. From a certain point of view, he still wasn't his true self. His future and potential were at a relatively ordinary level, and compared to the original heavenly Tao, he was really lacking. Sometimes, he also envied Yuan Tiandao. He envied Yuan Tiandao for having such an opportunity and such a future. But it was a pity that he had already stepped onto another path, and the only way out for him now was to rely on the world of laws and rely on the world of laws. Only then could he continue to exist. If he lost this, even if he had greater potential and a better future, he would no longer be the original heavenly Tao. After lamenting in his heart for a long time, the incarnation of the creator of the perfect world began to take the 3rd step of breaking away from his main body and began to transform everything apart from his essence. Although essence was the most important aspect of life, it didn't mean that transforming essence was the most difficult for living beings. In fact, the reason why essence was called essence was because it was the core of life, and as such an existence, the amount of it was naturally relatively small. Under such circumstances, converting it might have far-reaching effects, but in terms of how troublesome it was compared to everything else, it wasn't even on the list. Therefore, if he wanted to transform everything apart from his essence, the time needed would probably be hundreds of millions of times longer than the previous transformation. Even with the parallel universe as a support, the incarnation of the perfect world's creator would still need a long time to complete the transformation. During this period of time, the possibility that his main body didn't notice anything unusual was so slim that it was almost non-existent. In other words, it was almost inevitable that his main body would find out about his situation with such a clear understanding. The creator of the perfect world's creator naturally made preparations long ago. While he was constantly transforming himself, he was also beginning to strengthen his will. He was constantly leaving one backup plan after another in his mind, or rather, one logical chain after another. Through such logical chains, he constantly felt his heart and searched for the root of every thought he had, trying his best to avoid being affected by external thoughts and making stupid choices. This couldn't completely prevent him from being affected by his main body, but it could reduce the influence of his main body as much as possible. This wasn't completely satisfactory, but it was the best response he could come up with. The moment that the incarnation of the perfect world's creator was worried about had finally arrived. At a certain moment, an indescribable impulse suddenly surged from the depths of his heart. This impulse urged him to leave this space-time, leave the world of laws, and head to a certain location in the transportation network layer to search for something that was extremely important to him. This impulse appeared so abruptly, but it was also so natural. It felt like a sudden impulse, as if he suddenly had an inexplicable premonition. At this moment, he almost completely forgot everything else. He instinctively wanted to leave this parallel universe, leave the world of laws, and head to that location to search for the so-called precious thing he needed. However, at this moment, an indescribable pressure suddenly erupted from the surrounding parallel universes and brazenly acted on his body. In an instant, his entire body was completely suppressed, causing him to be unable to move at all. Under the impulse, the incarnation of the perfect world's creator began to struggle violently, trying to break free from the suppression. Although he was controlled by the impulse and almost lost his rationality, his own intelligence was not affected much. At this time, while he was struggling, he frequently used all kinds of magical methods that would make ordinary cultivators feel ashamed to death. As he moved, everything in this parallel universe was wantonly manipulated by him, and the power that erupted was enough to allow a cultivation sect to instantly transcend all the restrictions of laws from the bottom. However, such a method only made the entire parallel universe tremble continuously at this time. It couldn't transcend the suppression of the parallel universe at all. After struggling for a while, an inexplicable feeling suddenly emerged in the heart of the incarnation of the perfect world's creator. This situation doesn't seem right. I seem to have expected this to happen. When exactly did this happen, and what does this mean? These thoughts came one after another at this time, making him feel bewildered. Immediately afterward, he suddenly discovered that there was a logic chain in his heart. Why did I set this? Such doubts flashed in his heart, but he was extremely sure that this was what he had set. Since it was set by himself, he naturally wouldn't have much doubt. He immediately began to investigate the various thoughts and impulses that had arisen in his heart according to this logic chain. Using the logic chain to investigate his heart, he soon gained something. This impulse is the product of a combination of various special factors. It doesn't really come from the depths of my heart. This fact was revealed under the judgment of his logic chain, making him feel an indescribable joy in his heart. He found me. Sighing, he already understood in his heart. At this time, the impulse was still so strong that it was still urging him to leave this parallel universe and leave the world of laws. However, after confirming that this impulse wasn't the real impulse from the depths of his heart, he already had enough willpower to suppress this impulse. All of the techniques he had unleashed had also come to a complete halt. The suppression force of the parallel universe completely suppressed him at this moment, making his body seem to have turned into some kind of natural landscape, fixed somewhere in this parallel universe. During this process, the impulse continued to expand, constantly urging his body and mind, trying its best to draw him out of this parallel universe. If he hadn't realized that all this was a trap and that this impulse was a means of the main body, this incarnation would have probably been unable to hold on from the beginning. However, at this time, with the main body as an imaginary enemy, the existence of this impulse had already become a kind of battlefield. This made him have a strong fighting spirit at every moment. He felt that the stronger the impulse, the more powerless the opponent was, and naturally, the stronger his confidence was. This stalemate lasted for several years, and the time when the impulse reached its peak also occupied more than half of the time.